I've been thinking about this a lot lately, especially with Christmas right around the corner. It brings back a flood of memories from last year, memories I'd rather bury. But it's hard to ignore when the festive decorations, the cheerful music, and the general holiday spirit keep reminding me of how everything went down. Last Christmas was a turning point for me, the moment I finally realized how messed up my family dynamics were and decided to put myself first. Let me give you some background. My name's Alex, and I'm 30. I grew up in a small town, the kind where everyone knows your business. My family was pretty average on the surface. Mom, Dad, me, and my younger sister, Olivia. She's 6 years younger and has always been the golden child, the apple of my parents' eyes. I don't blame Olivia. She didn't ask to be the favorite. But it was glaringly obvious, even when we were kids. Her birthdays were extravagant events with decorations, mountains of presents, and enough cake to feed a small army. My birthdays, on the other hand, were always lumped in with Christmas, since mine falls a few days before. I'd get one practical gift, like a new sweater or a set of school supplies. I understood that money was tight, but it still made me feel less important. It wasn't just birthdays. When Olivia joined the school choir, my parents never missed a single performance. But when I had my final soccer game in high school, they were nowhere to be found. "We have to take Olivia to her piano lesson," they'd said. Stuff like that happened constantly. It was a clear message. Olivia's needs and wants always came first. The only people who treated me with any real affection were my grandparents. Grandma, especially, would try to make me feel included and would often call out my parents for their blatant favoritism. But it never really changed anything. When they passed away a few years ago, it was like losing the last bit of support I had in that house. After the funeral, things changed. My parents started leaning on me more, not in a way that showed they appreciated me, but in a way that felt like an expectation. They needed money, and they needed me to provide it. My job at the tech company was decent, but it wasn't enough to support myself, let alone my family. I started taking on freelance work, working late nights and weekends, barely getting any sleep. I sent them money every month, even though it meant scrimping and saving on everything else. One day my sister, Olivia, got accepted into a prestigious law school. My parents were ecstatic, of course. They called me, their voices filled with pride, talking about how bright her future was. Then came the subtle hints. "Law school is expensive," my dad said. "Emily will need a lot of support." I knew what they were asking. I had helped Olivia before, but this was a different level. Law school tuition was astronomical, and I was barely scraping by myself. But I couldn't say no. I felt guilty, like I owed them something for raising me. So I did it. I covered her first-year tuition, the application fees, even helped her with her living expenses. It was a huge financial strain, but I convinced myself it was worth it. Olivia was grateful at first. She'd call me, her voice full of excitement, telling me about her classes, her professors, her friends. But those calls became less frequent. She was always busy, always needing something, more money for books, for rent, for some random expense. The gratitude faded, replaced with an expectation. It felt like I was her personal ATM, and she didn't even bother to say thank you anymore. My parents, meanwhile, were oblivious. All they saw was that their daughter was doing well, and they didn't care how much it cost me. They never asked how I was doing, never acknowledged the sacrifices I was making. One night, at a family gathering, it all came to a head. Olivia was bragging about her law school experiences, making snide comments about my job. My parents laughed, their eyes filled with pride for her, but with disdain for me. It was the final straw. After that night, I stopped sending them money. I blocked their calls, ignored their texts. They tried to reach out through other family members, but I cut them off. It was hard, but it was necessary. The first few months were tough. I missed my family, even though they had never treated me well. But I also felt a sense of freedom, a relief from the constant pressure and expectations. I started focusing on myself, on my career. I took some online classes, hoping to one day start my own business. Things haven't been easy, but they've been better than I could have ever imagined. I'm proud of myself for standing up for myself, for putting my own needs first. I've learned that family isn't always about blood ties. It's about the people who support you, who love you for who you are, not who they want you to be. The silence after I cut them off was deafening. It was like a weight had been lifted, but also like a part of me was missing. I kept waiting for the phone to ring, for my mom to yell at me, for Olivia to guilt-trip me. But nothing. The quiet was unsettling. I started to question myself. Was I being too harsh? Was I wrong to cut them off completely? Maybe I should have just reduced the amount of money I sent, or talked to them about it. But then I'd remember the Christmas party, the way they laughed at me, the way they dismissed my accomplishments. I'd remember Olivia's entitlement, her coldness, and I'd know I had made the right decision. I focused on my work, throwing myself into my projects. I got a promotion, started leading a small team. It was challenging but rewarding. For the first time, I felt like I was good at something, like I was making a difference. I also started taking online classes, something I had always dreamed of doing. My parents had never supported my education, but now I could afford it myself. I was learning new things, expanding my horizons. Socially, things were a bit awkward. It's not easy to explain to people why you don't talk to your family. Most people just assumed there was some big falling out, and I didn't bother to correct them, but I didn't care what they thought. I was finally free from the expectations, the guilt, the constant need to prove myself. I was free to be myself, to pursue my own dreams. Then one day Olivia called. I hadn't heard from her in months, and I almost didn't answer. But curiosity got the better of me. "Alex," she said, her voice tight. "I need your help." My heart sank. I knew what was coming. "My tuition payment is due," she continued, "and Mom and Dad can't afford it. I've tried everything, but I'm out of options." I listened patiently, my mind racing. I had helped her before, but I had made it clear that I couldn't keep doing it. "Olivia," I said calmly, "I already helped you with your first year. I told you I couldn't keep doing this." Her voice changed, becoming sharp and accusatory. "But this is important. If I don't pay, I could get kicked out of law school. Do you have any idea what that would do to my reputation?" I was taken aback. "Olivia," I said, "are you seriously more worried about your reputation than your education?" She didn't hesitate. "Of course I am. I've worked so hard to get here. I can't let it all fall apart because you suddenly decided to be selfish." There it was again, that word, selfish. It stung, but not as much as it used to. "Olivia," I said, my voice firm, "I'm done. You need to figure this out on your own." She was silent for a moment, then her voice turned icy. "Fine, be that way. But don't come crying to me when you need something. At least I'm trying to do something with my life, unlike you." I hung up, my hands shaking. I felt a mix of anger and sadness. I had tried to help, but it was never enough. I was always the bad guy, the selfish one. But I knew I had made the right decision. I couldn't keep enabling her, couldn't keep sacrificing my own well-being for someone who didn't appreciate it. I took a deep breath and looked out the window. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the city. I was alone, but I was free. And that was worth more than anything. The news about Olivia spread like wildfire. Small towns have a way of amplifying whispers, and soon everyone knew that she had dropped out of law school. Some folks, the ones who had always looked down on me, whispered that it was my fault. If I had just helped her, they said, she would still be on track to become a lawyer. I ignored them. I knew the truth. Olivia's downfall wasn't my doing. It was the result of years of entitlement and a refusal to take responsibility for her own life. My parents, of course, blamed me too. They called me, their voices filled with anger and desperation. They told me I had ruined Olivia's life, that I was a disgrace to the family. I listened, my heart hardening. I had heard it all before. Their words no longer had the power to hurt me. "You're our son," my father pleaded. "You have a duty to help your family." "I've done more than my fair share," I replied calmly. "It's time for you to take responsibility for yourselves." They didn't give up easily. They tried to guilt-trip me, to manipulate me, to play on my emotions. But I stood firm. I had learned my lesson. The calls eventually stopped, but the whispers continued. I heard stories about how my parents were struggling, how Olivia was a shadow of her former self. I felt a pang of sympathy, but I didn't reach out. I had built a new life for myself, a life filled with purpose and meaning. I had a good job, a comfortable apartment, and a few close friends. I was finally happy. One day, I ran into Mrs. Bailey, my old neighbor at the grocery store. She looked at me with pity in her eyes. "I heard about your sister," she said. "It's such a shame." I nodded, not wanting to engage in conversation. "Your parents are taking it hard," she continued. "They're not as young as they used to be." I sighed. "I know, Mrs. Bailey, but there's nothing I can do." She gave me a knowing look. "Family is important, Alex. You don't want to have any regrets." I thanked her for her concern and walked away. I knew she meant well, but she didn't understand the whole story. I thought about her words as I drove home. Did I have any regrets? Maybe. But I knew I had made the right decision. I couldn't keep sacrificing my own happiness for people who didn't appreciate it. I pulled into my driveway and looked at my apartment building. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I had built this life for myself, brick by brick, and I wasn't going to let anyone take it away from me. Life went on. The seasons changed. Leaves turned from green to gold and then fell, blanketing the ground in a tapestry of autumn hues. Winter arrived, bringing with it the familiar chill and the festive decorations that now held a bittersweet significance for me. I kept moving forward, focusing on my work and my studies. My career was flourishing. The project my team had been working on launched to great success, and I was recognized for my contributions. I felt a sense of accomplishment I had never experienced before. The online business management course was challenging but invigorating. I was learning about finance, marketing, and strategy, and I could see how these skills could help me achieve my long-term goal of starting my own company. But even as I thrived in my professional life, the scars from my family situation lingered. I couldn't completely shake off the years of feeling inadequate, of being the less favored child. Sometimes, late at night, doubts would creep in, whispering that I wasn't good enough, that I didn't deserve my success. I learned to recognize these thoughts for what they were: echoes of the past, remnants of a toxic dynamic. I would remind myself of how far I had come, of the strength it had taken to break free. Socially, I was more cautious. I had a few close friends, colleagues I trusted and enjoyed spending time with, but I was hesitant to let anyone get too close. I didn't want to repeat the patterns of the past, to become dependent on anyone else's approval. One evening, I was having dinner with a colleague, Sarah. We were talking about our families, and she noticed my hesitation. "You seem to have a complicated relationship with your parents," she observed gently. I took a sip of my wine, considering how much to reveal. "It's a long story," I said finally. "We're not very close." Sarah didn't press, but her understanding gaze encouraged me to continue. I told her about the years of favoritism, the financial burden, the Christmas party that had changed everything. She listened without judgment, her expression a mix of empathy and admiration. When I finished, she said, "Alex, you've been through a lot, but you're incredibly strong. You built a life for yourself despite the challenges." Her words were like a balm on my wounds. It was the first time someone had acknowledged my struggles without offering unsolicited advice or trying to minimize my pain. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about Sarah's words. I realized that I had been so focused on escaping my past that I hadn't allowed myself to fully embrace my present. I had been living in a state of guarded self-sufficiency, afraid to let anyone in. But Sarah's kindness and understanding had shown me that it was possible to connect with others without losing myself. I could build healthy relationships based on mutual respect and support. I felt a sense of hope I hadn't experienced in a long time. The future stretched before me, full of possibilities. I was no longer defined by my past. I was free to create my own destiny. The holidays came and went. This time, there were no strained family gatherings, no forced smiles, no whispered criticisms. I spent Christmas with Sarah and a few other friends, enjoying the simple pleasures of good company and shared laughter. It was a far cry from the Christmases of my childhood, but it felt genuine, heartwarming. The new year dawned, bringing with it a renewed sense of purpose. I continued to excel at work, my confidence growing with each passing day. I enrolled in another online course, this one focused on entrepreneurship. I was slowly but surely building the foundation for my future. One crisp spring morning, I received a call from my aunt. I hadn't spoken to her in months, and my initial reaction was to ignore it, but something told me to answer. Her voice was subdued, laced with concern. "Alex," she said, "I'm calling about your father. He's been hospitalized." My heart skipped a beat. Despite everything, I couldn't deny the surge of worry that coursed through me. I listened as she explained that my father had suffered a mild heart attack. He was recovering, but the doctor had stressed the importance of reducing stress and making lifestyle changes. I thanked her for the information and hung up, my mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. I hadn't spoken to my father in over a year, and the news of his illness brought a wave of sadness and guilt. I spent the next few days wrestling with my conscience. Should I reach out? Would it do any good? I knew my parents were still struggling, both financially and emotionally. Olivia, from what I had heard, was still living at home, adrift and directionless. Finally, I decided to visit my father in the hospital. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I felt a need to see him, to offer some semblance of support. The hospital room was small and sterile. My father lay in the bed, looking frail and vulnerable. He seemed surprised to see me, his eyes filled with a mixture of apprehension and relief. We talked, tentatively at first. I asked about his health, and he updated me on his condition. The conversation then drifted to my life, my work, my plans for the future. He listened intently, his expression softening. As I was about to leave, he reached out and took my hand. "Alex," he said, his voice hoarse, "I'm proud of you. You've made something of yourself." Tears welled up in my eyes. It was the first time he had ever expressed such approval, such genuine pride. I squeezed his hand gently. "Thank you," I whispered. The visit wasn't a magical reconciliation. There were still unresolved issues, years of hurt and resentment. But it was a start, a crack in the wall that had separated us for so long. In the following months, I visited my father regularly. We talked, we reminisced, we even shared a few laughs. The tension between us gradually eased, replaced by a fragile understanding. I never resumed financial support, and I made it clear that I wouldn't tolerate any attempts to manipulate or guilt-trip me. But I offered emotional support, a listening ear, a presence in his life. My relationship with my mother and Olivia remained distant. They were still stuck in their old patterns, unable or unwilling to change. But I had found a measure of peace, a sense of closure. I had learned that forgiveness wasn't about condoning past behavior. It was about releasing the anger and resentment that were holding me back. It was about acknowledging the pain, accepting the imperfections, and moving forward with compassion. I had come a long way from the lost and lonely boy who had left that Christmas party years ago. I had faced my demons, healed my wounds, and built a life filled with purpose and authenticity. I had learned that true strength lay not in denying my vulnerability, but in embracing it. And I had finally found the freedom to be myself, scars and all. Story 2. I removed my granddaughter from that poisonous situation that day. I have to stop letting her go through it. I spent the next 8 years raising Zinnia alone. We established a life together after relocating abroad, distant from Caspian and Emboli, only the two of us. Caspian and Amberly visited Zinnia and me 10 years later, when we eventually made it back to our homeland. They were grinning as if nothing had occurred as they stood at my door. "You were missed," trying to sound like a loving family, they claimed. "After all, we are family. Together, let's live." I wasn't duped, though, I said, looking them both in the eyes. "Family isn't made up of idiots who can love their own kids. Kindly return. I'm a 55-year-old widow named Serafina. My hubby passed away a few years ago. Since then, I've been living alone in a big, peaceful house. I thought about moving in with Caspian and Emboli when my spouse went away. However, I had a gut feeling that living apart was preferable. Although I cherished my son, we had always been at odds, and his wife didn't help matters. I was aware that if I lived with Caspian and Amberly, I would probably be enticed to assist out at their bar. Serving clients all day didn't appeal to me because I wasn't as youthful as I once was. My body simply wasn't up to the effort anymore, and I wasn't very good among others. So I decided to remain alone. I was grateful that Caspian never proposed that we live together, even after my husband had left. After years of caring for others, I was at last able to enjoy some independence. Living alone seemed like a blessing at first. I didn't have to worry about raising kids or taking care of my husband anymore. I hoped the stillness would be pleasant. However, as the days went by, I came to see how isolating life may be. Having devoted my whole life to my family, I had neither friends nor interests. I tried to kill time by watching reruns of old TV dramas during the day, since the stillness in the home was so loud. I tried a few different pastimes, but none of them lasted. I felt like my life was meaningless. Zania and my grandchildren were the sole sources of brightness in my life. The eldest was a lovely, intelligent girl who was constantly upbeat and energetic. Conversely, Zenia was more reserved and shy, frequently standing in her elder sister's shadow. Alone was frequently complimented for her maturity considering her age. My heart hurt for Zania, even though she was frequently disregarded. Each time the girls came to visit Caspian and Amberly, Alone would approach me with a smile, wearing brand new clothing and having her hair done to perfection. But Zania wore Alone's old, tattered hand-me-downs. Her hair was constantly disheveled and untidy. Zania was obviously handled differently, not only by her parents, but also by herself. The room was illuminated by a single grin, but Zinia's eyes were always sad. Sadness clouded her face. She had been a chatty, energetic young child, but she had become quieter and more inward-looking over time. Despite my best efforts to avoid meddling too much in Caspian and Amberly's child-rearing, I couldn't help but feel protective of her. However, my worries increased each time they came to see. Zania would sit silently, undetected, while Caspian and Amberly would lavish her with love and dote on her alone. Every time I attempted to talk to Zania, either she would interrupt me, or Caspian and Amberly would totally ignore her and alter the topic. I made the decision to go to Caspian and Amberly's residence one day. I know the girls like the candies I provided. I'm hoping we can have a pleasant time together. I was getting close to the door. Shouting came from inside. An angry Caspian voice reverberated through the walls. Instead of remaining silent all the time, why don't you say something for once? I went for the doorbell, my pulse thumping in my chest, but the door sprang open before I could ring it. I took off my shoes and went inside without thinking twice. As I continued down the corridor, the yelling intensified, and I heard Caspian's accusatory voice once more. You are aware that she is to blame. We are embarrassed by your silence. With my pulse pounding, I ascended the stairs and discovered them in an upper room. Zania was seated on the floor, her cheeks sore from being slapped alone, her face red with tears, and Caspian and Amberly were standing over her. She continued to raise her hand as though she had just hit her sister. I could no longer remain silent. I hurried to Zania, who was seated on the floor, giving her a strong hug, and pushed my son and his wife out of the way. Alone stood close by, wide-eyed, while Caspian and Amberly looked at me in disbelief before hurriedly gathering themselves. Why are you coming in like way, Mom? First, you need to have knocked. Caspian became agitated and snapped. Yes, exactly. Isn't this a little impolite of you, Serafina? With a hint of irritation in her voice, Amberly continued. I became enraged and scowled at them both. It's impolite of you to surround a young girl in this manner and shout at her, Caspian. Her father is you. Do you not feel embarrassed to treat your child in this manner and by yourself? For what reason did you initially strike your sister? I spoke louder. Just that? After a moment of fear, she lowered her head and said, because the previous explanation was sufficient. Amberly glared at me as she gathered her into a tight hug. This is not all my fault. She lost her temper, obviously to protect her elder kid, but I wasn't about to back down. I gave her a frown in return. Protecting a child who has done something bad is not a mother's role. Instead of justifying her actions, you ought to be teaching her right from wrong. After a moment of silent observation, Caspian exclaimed, Mom, what are you thinking? and pointed at me. "Leave that fool alone." What I was hearing was unbelievable. The fools are Amberly and you. You should apologize to Zania, I responded with a yell. "I'm sorry. Who will offer her an apology?" Caspian gave a smirk, obviously not paying attention to what I said. Neither he nor Amberly expressed regret. As though it were the most commonplace thing in the world, they simply kept insulting Zania. As if she had been subjected to this treatment for too long, Zania, now in my arms, clung feebly to my clothing, her face empty and blank. Before I could even comprehend what was happening, I snatched her up and said, "I'm taking care of Zania from now on. I have to wait for an answer before I leave her in this house." They were astonished when I strode out of the room, but I left before I could get too far. I was followed by Caspian. He had a sly smile on his face. "Thank you, Mother," he added nonchalantly, as though he had just found the solution. I didn't know what to do with that mute. I couldn't speak. My own son was behaving like a burden to his daughter. Amberly emerged behind him with a little shabby bag and a frayed backpack, while I stood there trying to make sense of his callous remarks. "Here's Zania stuff," she said, carelessly thrusting the bags into my hands. "Take care of the rest, please." Zania and I were both stunned as we stood there looking at my son and daughter-in-law's looks. They had icy looks on their faces, apparently happy that Zania was leaving their house without saying anything further. Unable to comprehend the brutality of the circumstance, I turned and left. I gazed down at Zania as I assisted her in removing her shoes at the door when we returned to my house. I caught her biting her lip in an attempt to contain her emotions. I gave her a strong hug and gave her a gentle rub back because seeing her shattered my heart. I said, "I'm so sorry, Zania. I apologize for not helping you sooner, but everything will work out in the end. Now that Grandma is here, I will be your protector." After that day, Zania and I moved in together. She had completely stopped talking because of the devastation caused by her parents. It was hard for her to speak even the most basic phrases, like, "good morning." She wasn't communicating at school, according to her instructor, and this frightened both her and her classmates. I took her for a checkup at the hospital. Zania was diagnosed with selective mutism by the physicians, who explained that her deep-seated dread and anxiety were caused by the immense stress she had endured at home. She just couldn't talk, not because she didn't want to. She will eventually regain her voice with time and a more supportive atmosphere, the doctor informed me. I got her a notepad and a colorful pen on the way home, Xenia. "I gave them to her," I answered. "You can write or draw in this notebook if you have something you want to convey, but are unable to do so. Additionally, you may try pronouncing the phrase out gradually. You don't have to accomplish it all at once. You may do it little by little." "All right." Xenia opened the notepad right away and began writing. She flipped it around and showed me the page after a few minutes. "Grandma," she had scribbled, "thank you," and a little sketch of my face. She parted her lips as though she was attempting to speak, but nothing came out. She seemed disappointed. I gave her a gentle head pat while grinning. "Xenia, you're doing fantastic. I'm so proud of you for taking the first step already. One step at a time. All right, you can do this." Xenia forced a little grin. She began using the notepad to communicate at home and at school after that day. She began to talk again over the course of the following 2 years as her confidence gradually increased. Granny, can you guess what transpired today at school?" When she returned home, full of life and happiness, she would say this with excitement. I felt relieved and proud of her as she recovered and flourished. I once went to her school for a parent-teacher conference. A nice and welcoming teacher smiled at us as soon as we entered the classroom. "Hi there, Serafina." She greeted us as we sat down and said, "Hello, Xenia." The instructor produced Xenia's report card. She showed us the chart that showed the academic achievement of seniors and indicated that her grades had consistently risen from the previous year. It was evident from the pattern that she had been doing exceptionally well since moving in with me. I patted Xenia's head and grinned happily. I mentioned that she had been studying very hard. She spends all of her time at home reading books and working through challenging issues. Xenia has become passionate about studying ever since she was able to speak again. She would bring home the results of every test she aced with a huge smile, and I would display her flawless papers on the wall. The biggest satisfaction of all was seeing her develop and thrive. I believed that Xenia would benefit from taking an IQ test at the hospital. One day, during a school meeting, the teacher made a suggestion. Startled, I requested for additional information, a test of intelligence. For what purpose? Xenia may be what they termed gifted, the instructor suggested, a word used to describe youngsters with exceptional intelligence. She said Xenia appeared to be quite intelligent, much smarter than most adults. I found the concept intriguing. If Xenia was bright, it might explain why she seemed to find academics too simple. Without hesitation, the teacher believed that an IQ test may help us determine how to create the ideal learning environment to foster her skills. To get the test done, I brought Xenia to the hospital. In the end, the instructor was correct. Xenia's IQ was far higher than average, and she was talented. When I discovered that my granddaughter had such a remarkable talent, I was astounded. I sat her down later that day and said, "How do you find school? Do you find studying enjoyable?" Xenia shook her head, seeming bored. "To be honest, I find it dull and overly simple. When I attempt to explain to the teacher that I want to learn something more difficult, they simply don't get it." I paused at what she said. I started to question whether there was a way to push her intellectual limits beyond what her present school could provide. Her educational requirements appeared to be much above elementary school, maybe even at the middle or high school level. However, could Xenia, a young child who had not even completed elementary school, manage such sophisticated coursework? I spoke with the instructor once again, and she informed me of a system in the United States that allowed children to skip grades according to their academic standing. According to the teacher, Xenia could be able to study at a level more suited to her exceptional abilities if we relocated to America. Though I hadn't spoken to him since my husband's death, this made me think of my late husband's brother, who had been residing and working in the United States. When I explained the problem, I made the decision to ask for guidance. He said he would assist us in adjusting to life in America and instantly provided his assistance. "Are you relieved?" I proposed to Xenia the possibility of studying overseas. After silently listening, she grinned. "I'd like to depart," she said. "Only if it's with you, though." "I want to finish primary school with my pals before Grandma does," I agreed, touched by her consideration. "Naturally. Until you graduate, we'll wait, and I'll focus on getting better at English in the meanwhile," I informed her. Xenia grinned broadly in relief. The months that followed were filled with joyful recollections. Xenia enjoyed her last year of elementary school and made the most of it by making lifelong friends. We gave her friends our contact information so they could stay in touch once she eventually graduated, even after we relocated abroad. I made the decision to keep Caspian and Amberly in the dark about our plans. If they discovered that Xenia was gifted, I was afraid they would want to take her back in order to take advantage of her skills for their own benefit. Xenia easily adapted to life in America. She enthusiastically pushed herself into her studies and skipped grades. I did all in my power to help her, and witnessing her enthusiasm for learning once more gave me confidence that we had made the correct choice. As time passed, Xenia's abilities really started to show. In addition to her academic success, she finally enrolled at Harvard University to study business. I had no idea that she had launched her own business. "Grandma, I want to pay you back." She frequently expressed this with excitement, but in my opinion, she had already given me the highest possible return by developing into a bright, talented, and compassionate young lady. Xenia's accomplishments were not overlooked. After American news sources highlighted her accomplishments, her name quickly gained international recognition. She rose to fame as an individual. Many others were inspired by her narrative. I frequently pondered Caspian and Amberly's opinions on her achievements. Did they feel bad about how they had handled her? For their sake, I prayed they did. We had to go back to our native country for business purposes, 10 years after Xenia founded her firm. In an attempt to blend in, we rented a new apartment. But one afternoon, the doorbell rang. Without thinking, I opened the door, assuming it was a delivery. "It has been a long time, Mom. How are you?" The sound of Caspian's voice shook me. Emily was standing next to him, grinning in a way that made my stomach flip. I was too shocked to disguise it. Caspian, Amberly, why are you here? They disregarded my perplexity. Amberly called into the home as she moved closer. We've come to visit you, Zinnia. It's your parents. In a hurry, I blocked the door. What are you looking for? Do not approach my daughter, please. Caspian smiled pityingly at me. Mom? Don't be so aloof. She still has us as her parents. All we want to do is see her. Yes, said Amberly. Mother-in-law. After all, we are family. Let's speak with her, please. They surged by me and inside the home before I could stop them. Zinnia came out of the living room to listen to the noise. Grandma, what's going on? She inquired. She froze as her gaze fell on Caspian and Amberly, startled. But Amberly and Caspian were ecstatic to meet her. Look at you, Zinnia. You've come a long way, Amberly cried out, attempting to embrace her, but Zinnia dismissed her with a chilly dismissal. We can discuss in the living room if you'd like. I'll prepare some tea, Zinnia stated without waiting for a response, her voice cold. She entered the kitchen. Unfazed, Caspian and Amberly settled down on the couch and started talking openly about their past, as if nothing had ever happened. I'm uncomfortable. When I looked at Zinnia, she gave me a wink, indicating that everything was under control. The topic of conversation swiftly shifted to the true purpose of their visit, as I took a seat across from them. Due to inadequate management and isolation, the bar they had been operating had failed. All communication with them was severed when their oldest daughter vanished. Now unemployed and having financial difficulties, Amberly and Caspian were desperate. Would you think about helping us, Zinnia? Caspian inquired. He spoke in a desperate tone. We reared you for 6 years, even though you departed when you were little. You owe us. Yes, exactly, Amberly said in a beseeching tone. Your family still includes us. Time is gone. Let's make it up. Together, let's live and make new memories. What I was hearing was unbelievable. How were they able to? They hurried back to Zinnia after everything they had done, hoping that she would assist them now that she had achieved success. Before I had a chance to speak, Zinnia's words broke the tenseness. With a cool, collected smile, she stated, Idiots aren't my family. Grandma is the only family I have. Please, go now. Amberly and Caspian gazed at her with shock. However, Zinnia remained steadfast, approaching the door with composure, and opened it. Farewell. Caspian and Amberly had vanished, slinking away in defeat with a last click of the door latch. Still in amazement, I watched them go, but Zinnia only grinned when I turned to face her. Grandma, she said. Let's move, shall we? She said that she had been covertly preparing to construct a home for the two of us that would be accessible to ensure my comfort as I grew older. I was unable to contain my appreciation. With tears in my eyes, I said, Thank you, Zinnia. She simply flushed and laughed in embarrassment. We moved into our new house a few months later. Even the notepad and pen we had purchased when she first moved in with me were framed and on display, and the walls were covered with memories we had made together over the years. I always had a great sense of love and pride when I looked at them. I made the decision to prepare zinnias today. Favorite recipe? I smiled and went into the kitchen. My heart is full. Story 3. My world fell apart when I was 12 years old. It began like every other morning. Before leaving for his job as a site manager at the construction firm, Dad gave me a final kiss. As he walked away, Mom hardly raised her head from her phone. I recall thinking it was odd that they used to be so unlike from one another. That was the last time I saw my father alive, and my name is Melanie Carter. That afternoon during work, he passed out, a severe heart attack. They said that when the principal summoned me to her office, I was in math class. Mom was there already. She had her mascara on, in spite of everything she had just learnt. Your father has passed away, Melanie, she remarked in a firm voice. I started weeping, but my mother simply sat there and gave me a robotic back pat. I heard her talking to her friend Linda on the phone that night. Mom's words rang through the thin walls of our suburban house, and I wasn't attempting to listen in. She remarked in a quiet but clear voice, Actually, Linda, this might be for the best. It is far more acceptable to be a widow than to be divorced. I also get to retain everything without having to deal with attorneys. She chuckled. In fact, I laughed. Yes, I am aware. At the funeral, I'll portray the distraught widow. I've already chosen the ideal black gown. To prevent myself from yelling, I sat on the steps with my palm over my mouth. Sister. Dad. While everyone else was expressing their sympathies to my distraught mother at the burial, Sarah was the only one who appeared to see through her charade. Sarah simply stood there with a sorrowful shake of her head. She was aware that she had always seen how Mum handled her father. Recovering from her loss didn't take long. She began hosting a man for dinner within 3 months. Richard Thompson was his name, and he had 2 children from his former marriage, Emma, age 10, and Brandon, age 11. When they came to visit, Mom would prepare extravagant dinners, something she had never done for Dad. One evening, Mom stated in a syrupy, sweet voice, "Melanie, honey, we have something to share with you, Richard and I." I anticipated what would happen. The way they sat on the sofa together, putting hands together, Mom wearing an adolescent smile. It was clear, we're getting married. Mom said, "Isn't it amazing? You'll have siblings and a new father." I tried to grin, but I felt sick to my stomach. That's fantastic. Mom? Well done. Richard gave me a smile that stopped short of his eyes. According to him, Brandon and Emma are ecstatic to have a new sibling. However, I had observed his children's gaze on me when they were there, as if I were something affixed to the sole of their pricey trainers. I contacted Sarah that night and sobbed for hours. After carefully listening, she stated something that would always stick in my memory. "Sweetheart, there are moments when the family you chose matters more than the one you were born into. Keep it in mind." 1 week following the honeymoon, Brandon and Emma moved in. The greatest rooms in the home, including my playroom, which turned into Emma's art studio, were promptly grabbed by them. My mother just told me not to be selfish when I attempted to object. "Melanie, they must be made to feel welcome." The marriage to Richard changed Mom into someone else entirely. While I ate supper by myself in my room, she would spend hours watching Brandon's soccer practice or helping Emma with her schoolwork. Richard seemed to have hung the stars and moon specifically for her based on the way she gazed at him. She had never looked at Dad like that before. She would claim that Brandon needs new soccer cleats, or Emma is enrolled in summer art lessons. Money was always available for their need. I also learnt to cease requesting things in the meantime, as if I were being unreasonable for requiring pencils. Even necessities like new school supplies come in sizes. They began traveling together, simple weekend travels to neighboring towns or camping excursions in state parks. Nothing spectacular. However, I never received an invitation. As she prepared snacks for Brandon and Emma, Mom would add, "You'll just be bored," without even glancing at me. In addition, the cat needs to be fed. During these travels, I would wind up at Aunt Sarah's place. I grew to love her little cottage more than I ever did our house. Despite never having children of her own, she treated me as though I were her daughter. As she watched me open my overnight bag for what seemed like the 100th time, she would exclaim, "This isn't right, Melanie." This kind of favoritism is inappropriate for a mother. I tried to pretend it didn't hurt by shrugging. "Aunt Sarah, at least I have you." I made the decision to bring up college one evening when I was 16, over supper. I had been looking at colleges since I wanted to pursue business management. I said, "Mom?" Picking a moment when everyone was feeling upbeat. I wanted to discuss applying to colleges. Mom's dish clattered as her fork struck it. "University. We can't afford to send you to college, Melanie. We must consider the education of Emma and Brandon." Emma didn't even bother to conceal her contented smile as Brandon grinned across the table. Richard continued to eat as though he was completely unconcerned by the discussion. I cornered Mom in the kitchen later that evening. "How about Dad's finances?" I inquired. He had been saving for years and had life insurance. Mom's expression grew stern. She yelled, "I've been taking care of you for the last 4 years with that money." Food, clothing, shelter. Did you believe it was all free? "Melanie, stop being so cocky. You cannot just make demands on me." Her icy tone and the blatant falsehood in her remarks left me speechless. Dad had put a lot of effort into saving money for me, and now it was all gone. Spent money on her ideal new family, as I saw from a distance. I was still crying when I went to Sarah's place the next weekend. I told her everything about my mother's harsh rejection of my college aspirations while we sat at her kitchen table, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee permeating the room. With her hands encircling her coffee mug, Aunt Sarah listened silently. She got up silently and vanished into her study when I was done. Doors were opening and closing, I heard. She then came back with a heavy package. "About 2 weeks before he passed away, your father visited me," she continued, passing the envelope across the table. It was odd. He appeared anxious, almost as though he anticipated an event. When he handed it to me, he made me swear to protect it until you were prepared for college. I opened the packet with shaking hands. A bank statement with a sizable savings account in my name, and Aunt Sarah as the trustee was found within. For years, Dad had been saving money in secret. "Your mother had been acting strangely," he remarked. Sarah then clarified in a quiet voice. "No matter what, he wanted to ensure your future was safe. Over the years, interest has been accruing on the money." I started crying, but these were tears of love and appreciation for my father, who kept me safe long after he passed away. I wiped away my tears and continued, "We can't tell Mum about this." Sarah gave a nod of consent. I kept quiet about my ambitions to attend college and concentrated on my schoolwork for the following 2 years. Emma and Brandon used every chance to remind me of my alleged future. "Melanie? Hello." Brandon used to sneer in the corridor. "I've heard that a dishwasher is needed at the downtown cafe. Send in your application as soon as possible." Emma would participate. "If you're lucky, they might let you to bus tables." They would chuckle as if it were the world's funniest joke. I just went by them, making them angry with my silence. Graduation day then arrived. Mom and Richard invited me into the living room for a serious conversation, just as I had taken off my cap and gown. I stood in front of them as they sat on the couch like judges preparing to deliver sentences. "Melanie," Richard said in a firm tone, "you are now 18. Although we've been kind, you must realize that you can't stay here indefinitely. You must start working and making your own money." Calmly, I grinned. "I fully comprehend. I'll be leaving by the following week." They traded surprise books. Evidently, they had anticipated opposition or tears. Mom's mouth opened as if she were about to speak, then shut again. "All okay. Good." At last, Richard succeeded. That shows a lot of maturity. Neither of them inquired about my intended destination or means of subsistence. They were both relieved that I had consented so readily to take the chance of posing potentially difficult questions. Moving day came sooner than I thought. I crammed my life into 2 bags and 4 cardboard boxes. It was unexpected how little I had accumulated over the years. It was almost as if I had been quietly getting ready for this moment by myself. At precisely 9 in the morning, Sarah arrived in her blue Honda. I half expected my mum or someone else to come check what was going on, so I watched her park through the window of my bedroom. As we drove away, I could see movement behind Emma's room's curtains, but the house was still quiet. In the side mirror, I saw my boyhood house becoming smaller and smaller until it vanished entirely. I refrained from crying. Rather, every mile that separated us from that home of meticulously constructed pretenses made me feel lighter. That summer, I worked at Sunshine Cafe, serving sandwiches and coffee to regulars who loved me like family and always left generous tips. When I wanted to save more money for college, the owner, Mrs. Peterson, even allowed me to work extra shifts. In September, I flew to Marshall State University, 3 states away from my familiar surroundings, to begin a new life. Although the business management program was difficult, I gave it my best. Since middle school, Jessica, my flatmate, has been my first true buddy. She was initially unaware of my entire tale, but when she did, she just gave me a hug and said, "Girl, their loss. Their demise." My window into the life I'd left behind was Mom's Facebook page. The ideal family was right there. I'm grinning at Brandon. Soccer competitions, commemorating Emma's successes at art shows, and snapping beach pictures while on vacation. Every time, the captions read like promotional material. We are really proud of our wonderful children. They're nothing superior to spending time with family. There was not a single mention of me. I didn't seem to be there. We cooked together and watched old films at Aunt Sarah's throughout the holidays. We established our own customs, and I valued them more than any imposed family meal. She would occasionally gently take away my phone when she saw me browsing through my mother's social media posts. "Avoid torturing yourself," she would say. "Now you are creating your own narrative." I was too. Because of my academic performance and internships, I graduated with honors and job offers in hand. During a class project showcase, Jessica's father, Mr. Reynolds, who owned a significant marketing company, took notice of my work. He told me during my interview that we created intelligent minds like yours. Your instructors think highly of you. Although I began as a junior analyst, I wasn't satisfied with that role. In my spare time, I researched market trends, took on extra projects, and worked late. I had saved enough money for a down payment on my own apartment and had been promoted twice in 5 years. Keys in hand, I stood in my empty living room on the day I signed the mortgage papers and at last broke down in tears. They were tears of joy, tears of achievement, pride, and the realization that I had achieved my goals on my own terms. Then the greatest surprise arrived. Approximately 7 years after I began working for the company, Mr. Reynolds summoned me to his office one morning. He slid a folder across his desk and said, "We're creating a new position. Senior Strategic Development Director. I concur with the board that you are the best candidate for the position." The salary figure almost made me gasp when I opened the folder. Considering my age, it was more money than I could have ever dreamed earning. I never understood why I should share my life on the internet. I did have accounts on social media, but I mostly used them to post sporadic pictures of coffee shops or sunsets. The only person who was aware of my promotions, my new flat, or the svelte black Mercedes I had purchased for myself as a reward for getting the director job, was Sarah. "It's all yours, and you deserve it." Every time I told her about my accomplishments, she would say it with pride. Emma and Brandon's social media accounts, meanwhile, were nothing more than a never-ending highlight reel of mediocrity. Emma would post pictures of herself at the local mall, while Brandon would post pictures of his used Hyundai Elantra with captions like, "Living the dream, blessed luxury life," tagging high-end brands that she was obviously unable to purchase. I laughed especially at one post. "When perseverance pays off," Brandon writes while standing beside his vehicle at a local car show, "Success. Entrepreneur." I was reading this while sitting in my Mercedes AMG, worth more than his annual wage, yet I didn't feel the need to prove anything to anyone. Then came the telegram that altered everything. It came up on my Facebook one Tuesday morning. "Melanie, it's your mother. My 55th birthday is coming up next month, and I'm hosting a celebration at an upscale restaurant, LeBlanc. You've probably never heard of it. I expect you to attend. It's on the 15th, 7 p.m. sharp. Don't embarrass me." I gazed at the computer, reading the message numerous times. 12 years of quiet. And this was how she reached out. "How are you, Mel? Try to close the distance, Mel," just in order to show up for her party with the subliminal jab at the cost of the restaurant. Something prevented me from deleting the message right there. Perhaps out of curiosity. Or the curiosity about what may occur. Sarah raised the question as we were having tea in her quaint kitchen that evening after I had contacted Mr. Reynolds and asked for a week off, and then scheduled a trip to my hometown. I had been thinking about myself. "What will you be giving her?" I took out my phone to show her the email confirmation, and I grinned. A luxurious Maldivian holiday package, a 5-star resort for 2 weeks. Included were first-class flights valued at almost $15,000. Aunt Sarah's gaze grew wide. "That's Melanie. It's excessive. She is not deserving." "Yes, I am aware that she doesn't." I sipped my tea and laughed. Can you picture her expression, though, as she discovers what she has been lacking for so long? She was surprised to learn that the daughter she discarded had achieved greater success than she had anticipated. When she realizes how mistaken she was about me, I want to watch her response. Aunt Sarah laughed and shook her head, saying, "You're a little bit evil." I adore it. On Mom's birthday night, I put on my Chanel gown, With a price tag that might have purchased 10 of the gaudy ensembles I saw later that evening, it was elegant in its simplicity. I was pleased by how this would support their presumptions about my life, so I purposefully took a cab to the restaurant. The blog was just what I had anticipated. People who had never dined in a genuinely upscale restaurant were impressed by this type of establishment. The sort of establishment where the sweets were covered in gold leaf, but the seafood was frozen. This looked like a diner, and I'd had business meals here. The party was already in full flow when the hostess showed me to a secluded area. Under the chandelier, Mom's sequined dress glistened as she sat at the head of the table. Brandon and Emma surrounded them like successors to the throne, while Richard stood at her side. The other chairs were occupied by Linda, who used to pinch my cheeks too hard, and relatives I hadn't seen in over 10 years. Rachel, my cousin, was always boasting about her children and other people from my past. Mom's mouth twisted slightly as her gaze flitted over me. "You came, Melanie. For the occasion, you could have dressed up a little more." Linda gave Mama a set of fragrant candles as I sat at the far end of the table and watched the performance. "It's from that nice mall shop," she said with pride. Mom gushed about it as if it were diamonds. For a day of relaxation, Cousin Rachel offered a gift card to a nearby spa. She said that Mom was squealing more excitedly. The presents kept coming. A basket of bath items, a cookbook, and a pretty vase. Mom made care to highlight how considerate and ideal each present was, treating them all like priceless treasures. The moment for Brandon and Emma then arrived. Together, they got to their feet, beaming as if they had won the jackpot. It still seemed uncomfortable to hear Brandon refer to her as Mom. "Emma and I spent our money on a wonderful gift for you." Emma displayed a picture from her phone. "This smart TV is 65 inches. It was brought and installed in your living room already." Mom started crying and gathered them both in a close embrace. "My lovely giving kids, it's unbelievable that you accomplished this. You must have spent months saving money." At last everyone looked at me. I took out a little, tastefully wrapped gift from my purse. Mom's face instantly becomes serious. "What is this meant to be? See by opening it." Quietly, I offered, but she didn't. Rather, her cheeks flushed with rage. "I was expecting just this from you," she spat. "You get here wearing that simple outfit. It's probably your sole decent possession. You can't afford a car, so you take a cab. You give me this immediately. This little box. What on earth could be in here that would make a McDonald's gift card worthwhile?" The box was thrown back to me by her. It scratched the poor veneer of the table as it skidded over it. Emma and Brandon laughed behind their hands. A few visitors were uneasy. The drama appeared to be entertaining to others. As like nothing had happened, Richard continued to devour his dessert. Calmly, I took up the package and brushed off the crumbs from the tablecloth that had adhered to its tasteful covering. There was silence in the room as everyone waited to see what I would do. "Mom, you know what's funny?" My voice was steady as I spoke. "This little package contains a receipt for a lavish 2-week trip to the Maldives. 5-star resort, first-class flight. Everything is included, $15,000. Her face was devoid of color. Emma clattered her fork on the floor. "That is." "It's not possible," Mom stumbled. "Something like that was out of your price range. It's clear that you're lying." I couldn't contain my laughter. "If you had taken any interest in my life during the previous 12 years, you would have known whether or not I could afford it. Let me catch up with you, however. I work at Reynolds Marketing Group as a senior director. My flat in the city is mine. I didn't want to leave my Mercedes parked in this neighborhood, so I took the cab you made fun of." Brandon's jaw dropped. Emma was no longer laughing. "However, you're so certain that I'm a failure." Tucking the package back into my handbag, I went on. "It's also obvious that you don't want anything from me. I will not further ruin your birthday. Take pleasure in your television. The resolution seems to be nearly as excellent as the one in my home theater, I've heard." With my head held high and my shoes clicking in the unexpected quiet, I left. I immediately went to Aunt Sarah's house when the maîtresse summoned a cab. 2 cups of tea were already steaming on the coffee table while she waited for me. I filled her in on all the events. "There are certain people who never change." She shook her head and moaned. "Appearances have always been more important to your mother than actuality." My phone began to ring while we were still conversing. I knew who it was. but I couldn't identify the number. "Melanie, my dear," honey oozed from Mom's voice. "Where she obtained my number is unknown to me. I've been reflecting about what transpired." "Have you?" I answered calmly. "Indeed. And now I see that I could have acted too quickly. I would be delighted to accept that present if you are still prepared to give it to me. This may be a new beginning for us. I'd like to re-enter your life. We are related, no." I finally understood what I was saying. We're not related. All we have in common is our DNA. Furthermore, you had no intention of repairing our relationship. All you want is that trip package. My phone kept buzzing after I left town, so I hung up. Mom phoned from several numbers: Richard's phone, the house, her mobile, and even his phone. The texts began to pour in as soon as she realized I wouldn't answer. "Please give me a call back, Melanie. This is something we must discuss. What you stated regarding your employment has been on my mind. Perhaps you might assist Brandon with his marketing endeavors. He is quite imaginative. Emma has expressed her desire to work as an intern for a large organization such as yours. Her college applications would look fantastic with it. The home requires some repairs. Additionally, each communication was clearer than the prior since you're doing so well. No regrets, no recognition of the past. Just a never-ending barrage of inquiries and clues on my finances. It was similar to witnessing a frantic gambler attempt to recover losses, but it wasn't money that Mom had lost. It has to do with her bond with her daughter. Like I was reading a case study for work, I approached each communication with a certain detachedness. The range of the techniques was nearly astonishing. Shame. Your mommy is me. How are you able to ignore me? Flattery. You have achieved such success as a woman. Manipulation. Family should support one another, even in the face of danger. I'll inform everyone about your mother's abandonment. I keep getting calls from your mom, and a week after I got back home, Sarah called me to tell me. If you believe it, she came to my house today, demanded that I reveal your address to her. You told her what? Even though I knew the answer, I still asked. Sarah laughed when I warned her to leave my property before I contacted the police. Her face should have been visible to you. She insisted that she was entitled to know her daughter's residence. She forfeited that privilege years ago, I told her. I could see Mom attempting to intimidate Aunt Sarah into giving her what she wanted while standing on her doorstep, most likely dressed in one of her pricey clothes. I had been observing the same pattern throughout my life, but now I could plainly understand what it was. She didn't take it well, and Sarah went on to scream about how unappreciative we were of one another and how she had given up everything for you. It's likely that the neighbors heard everything. When she at last understood that I would not compromise, she hurried to her vehicle. But watch out, Melanie. She exuded desperation. I've blocked her on all platforms already. I gave Aunt Sarah my word. My office's security, phone, email, and social media all know not to let her in. If she arrives after the call is over, I looked at all I had created for myself as I strolled around my flat. I worked hard to earn the contemporary furnishings I selected, the artwork on the walls, and the city view outside my windows. I reflected about my mother's communications and her unexpected interest in my life now that she was aware of my financial situation. It was nearly comical in the end. She had thrown away a connection with her daughter in order to create the illusion of a beautiful family, and now she was frantically trying to re-enter my life in order to seem successful. But I had learnt one important thing from her. Legal papers aren't about family. It all comes down to love, support, and sticking by one another through good times and bad. Without Sarah, I had that. I changed the name on the Maldives holiday package to Sarah Carter over the phone with the travel agency the next morning. My aunt attempted to object when I informed her, but I persisted. She never deserved this as much as you do. You've been a better mother to me than she ever was, I remarked. Sarah then gave me a strong embrace, and I felt like I was right at home for the first time in years. Story 4. My brother Tommy was born when I was 7 years old. My name is Riley. He entered the world too soon. I recall hitting the glass with my nose, observing him as he lay in that transparent cage filled with cables and tubes. Everything started to alter at that point. In order to spend more time with Tommy, Mom changed jobs to part-time work. She would spend hours simply observing his breathing while sitting in the rocking rocker next to his incubator. After work, Dad would head directly to the hospital, without even pausing to greet me at home. Things didn't improve when Tommy eventually returned home. They worsened. As I learned to take care of myself, Mom would leap at the slightest hint of his whining. Mom became too busy nursing Tommy to help me make my own lunch sandwiches. Since no one had time to assist me anymore, I learned how to tie my shoes and fix my own hair. My 7th birthday was the first time I truly realized how different things were. Mom and Dad entirely forgot about it. That morning, I waited for someone to say something, bring out a cake, or just wish me a happy birthday while I sat at the kitchen table. Dad was reading the newspaper, while Mom was busy trying to convince Tommy to finish his breakfast. Not until that evening, when my teacher, Mrs. Roberts, called to wish me a happy birthday. Mom did recall. As a gift, she handed me one of Tommy's old plush animals and hastily put together a little cake. But even with his name on the tag, I discovered that I could find solace elsewhere, mostly at my Aunt Sarah's place. In contrast to my parents, she saw me. She was Dad's younger sister. In many respects, her husband, Uncle Mark, and their daughter Emma were my biological family. I began spending more and more time with them because they lived right across town. Emma and I would go shopping together, and she would treat us the same way and purchase us identical clothes. Mom once noticed me wearing a brand new frock that Sarah had purchased for me. A mixture of guilt and rage disfigured her features. "You're pampering her, Sarah." That evening, she called and complained. "Your presents are too expensive for us to keep up with." In actuality, they had enough of money for Tommy. I wore the same clothing until they actually broke apart, while he got new toys nearly every week. When I was 11 years old, I recall one specific occurrence. I'm still furious over it when I consider it. One day after school, my instructor called Mom aside. "But Riley worries me, Mrs. Anderson." "Quietly," Miss Thompson said. "She hasn't changed her wardrobe in 2 months. They're becoming quite worn out." Mom's face flushed. "Well, those are simply her favorite outfits," she lied with ease. "She is adamant about wearing them. Children are like that." However, Mom's humiliation turned to anger when we arrived home. She took hold of my arm so firmly that it was marked. "You have no right to humiliate us in that way." She hit me across the face with her scream. "Do you want to be perceived as poor parents by everyone?" At least to myself, I wanted to yell back that they were terrible parents, but I simply watched Tommy play with his new remote control vehicle while I held my burning cheek. In the adjacent room, I was less of a daughter and more of a living maid by the time Tommy turned 8. Each morning began in the same manner. Get up early, prepare everyone's breakfast, assemble Tommy's meal, and tidy up after everyone. In addition to a list of other jobs my mother had come up with during the day, the dishes were always waiting for me when I returned home from school. I eventually lost it one evening after spending hours preparing supper, doing laundry, and assisting Tommy with his schoolwork. My back hurt from standing all day and my hands were sore from cleaning pots. "Mom?" I'm worn out. My voice cracked as I spoke. "Is there anyone else that can assist with the housework?" Just long enough to say that, Dad looked up from his phone. "Riley, you're 13 now. You're old enough to assist with household chores. That is the behavior of responsible adults." However, Tommy is not required to take any action. Mom yelled at Tommy, who was still little, when I objected. "He requires some time to be a kid." I also wanted to shout that I was still a kid. However, what was the purpose? I ended up spending more and more time at Aunt Sarah's place instead. I found refuge at their house, where I might be a child again. Despite being 5 years my junior, Emma grew up to be the younger sister I wish Tommy had been. Together, we would spend hours building intricate structures, something I was never able to accomplish at home since Tommy would constantly ruin my creations. I occasionally stayed overnight, sleeping in their spare room, which over time gathered some of my belongings, including a few books, a toothbrush, and some pajamas. Neither of my parents ever phoned to see how I was doing. They probably didn't even realize I was absent much of the time. Uncle Mark turned into the much-needed father figure in my life. Late into the night, he would frequently catch me working on my schoolwork at their kitchen table. He helped me with my math one night and remarked, "You know, Riley, you have a wonderful future ahead of you, even if your parents may not realize it. However, you must concentrate on your schoolwork. When such scholarships are awarded, get high marks, because, as much as I hate to say it, I don't believe your parents will be providing financial aid for college." Although his remarks were harsh, they also gave me direction. With newfound vigor, I threw myself into my studies. I became a member of the school's debate club and practiced 3 days a week after school. I participated in every academic challenge I could find, including math Olympics, scientific fairs, and essay contests. I defeated students from 15 other schools to take first place in the regional debating tournament. Even a little article about it appeared in the local newspaper. My mother gave the article a quick look and remarked, "That's nice, dear," when I showed it to them over dinner. "Tell Riley about your goal in today's football practice, Tommy." But their lack of interest just motivated me to put in more effort. I began attending advanced placement classes and stayed up late to finish homework for extra credit. My parents didn't notice, but my instructors did. They began recommending college preparation classes and summer academic activities. I worked as a waitress after school for the first time in my life when I turned 16, landing my first real job at Sunshine Cafe. I had my own money, which I had earned on my own. I felt liberated when I received my first paycheck. I recall looking at the paper's numbers and making plans for what I could purchase, such as school supplies I wouldn't have to beg for, or possibly some new clothes that would fit. However, my brief period of autonomy was short-lived. One evening, with Dad standing behind her with his arms folded, Mom cornered me in the kitchen. "So," she said in a sharp voice, "when did you intend to share your work with us? While you live with us, eat our food, and use our utilities, you are earning money." Dad gave a nod. "We've come to the conclusion that you should pay a portion of the household expenses. It should be covered by half of your paycheck." Nevertheless, despite losing half of my income, I was still able to save enough money to purchase a smartphone for myself. Nothing super fancy, but it was new, and it was mine. It was my first actual piece of technology. Tommy had the newest iPhone, and I had been using an old flip phone that could hardly send texts. That phone made me very proud. I downloaded educational apps, used it to take notes in class, even joined some study groups online for a week. Everything was perfect. Then Tommy spotted me using it. "Hey, that's a nice phone," he said, walking into my room without knocking. "Way better than that piece of junk you had before. Give it to me." I clutched the phone tighter. "No way. I bought this with my own money." His face twisted into that familiar spoiled expression. "Come on, my phone is getting old. I need a new one." When I refused again, he stormed out. I could hear him thundering down the stairs, and I knew exactly where he was going. Sure enough, 10 minutes later, Mom and Dad appeared in my doorway. "Riley," Dad said in his reasonable voice. "That was anything but reasonable. Your brother tells us you're being selfish." "I bought this phone myself," I said, trying to keep my boy steady with the money I earned after giving you half of my paycheck. They left eventually, but not before calling me ungrateful, selfish, and a terrible sister. I went to bed that night with my phone clutched tight to my chest. 3 days later, I found it in pieces on my bedroom floor. The screen was shattered. The case cracked open like someone had deliberately stomped on it. When I confronted Tommy, he just smirked. "Maybe you should take better care of your things," he said with a shrug. "Stuff breaks sometimes." The day my college acceptance letters arrived should have been one of the happiest days of my life. All those late nights studying, the extra classes, the academic competitions, they had finally paid off. 3 colleges had accepted me: Riverside University, Wellington College, and our local state university. I sat on my bed spreading the letters out in front of me. Riverside and Wellington were my dream schools, but they both required substantial tuition payments. State University wasn't as prestigious, but they'd offered me a full scholarship. The choice was obvious. I couldn't afford to pay for college on my own, and I knew better than to expect help from my parents. There was just one catch. The acceptance letter from State University included a note about housing. "As you reside within city limits, you do not qualify for student housing. Our dormitories are reserved for out-of-state and long-distance students only. I decided to share the news with my parents over dinner that night. Tommy was there too, shoveling pasta into his mouth while playing some game on his phone. The latest model, of course. I got accepted to college, I announced, trying to keep the pride in my voice. 3 of them, actually. I'm going to attend State University. They're offering me a full scholarship. To my surprise, both my parents looked up. Mom even smiled. Well, that's wonderful, Riley, Dad said, actually, sounding pleased for once. You see what hard work can accomplish. I felt a warm glow in my chest. Maybe things were finally changing. Maybe they were finally seeing me. Then Mom cleared her throat. Now that you're going to be an adult student, we need to discuss your living arrangements. We've decided you should pay rent. When they named the amount, I literally choked on my pasta. Tommy had to pound me on the back, looking far too amused by my distress. That's almost $1,000. I gasped when I could breathe again. That's impossible. I can't afford that. Mom shrugged, taking a delicate bite of her dinner. We pay rent for this house every month. Riley have been for years. You're an adult now. It's time you learned about real-world obligations. But I'll be a full-time student, I protested. Even if I work 2 half-time jobs, I can make that much. My parents shared a glance I'd seen many times before, the one that indicated problems for me. Well, Dad said slowly, if you can't contribute to the household expenditures, perhaps it's time you sought your own place to live. Time to stand on your own 2 feet. But what about Tommy? I couldn't help asking. Will he have to pay rent when he gets 18? That's different, Dad snapped. There are specific needs for your sibling. Particular requirements? Tommy was now in excellent health. Since he was a toddler, he had never experienced any health problems. But I realized there was no use in disputing. The following 2 days were devoted to putting my life into bags and cartons. Not much. I had few belongings because I was the less popular child for years. Every item I packed served as a reminder of all the love and things I had never experienced. Tommy's voice could be heard behind me as I carried my final box out the front door. At last, he growled, I'll create the best possible gaming setup in your room. Since there is nowhere else for the gaming chairs to go, I could move the large TV to where your bed was. That night I was standing on Aunt Sarah's porch, ringing the doorbell and fighting back tears. Uncle Mark yelled for Aunt Sarah as soon as he opened the door, after glancing at my face and the suitcases at my feet. What did they do? And when I told Sarah what had happened, her voice raised in rage. You were expelled? I was unable to pay their rent, so they had their own daughter. My voice broke as I said, I don't care if you're 18 or 80, they said, because I'm 18 now. Uncle Mark cut in, his cheeks flushed with rage. Are you going to stay with us? Don't argue. I lay in their guest room that night. I eventually let myself weep in my room, not only out of fear or despair, but out of relief. I felt completely at home for the first time in my life. Sarah and Uncle Mark insisted that I concentrate on getting ready for school, so they wouldn't allow me pay the rent or purchase food while I worked full-time at Sunshine Cafe that summer, saving every cent I could for college fees. I began attending classes at State University in the autumn. It was challenging to juggle my studies and half-time job at the cafe, but I was committed to succeeding, and Sarah and Uncle Mark treated me the same way they had Emma. They helped me with my homework, celebrated my accomplishments, and even insisted that I go to the beach with them as part of their family holiday. Being seen as an equal part of the family was odd. Every time they presented me to their friends as a Riley, every time they featured me in family pictures, it made me feel better every time they displayed my accomplishments on the wall next to Emma's. Tommy and my parents stopped talking to one another. Every time we crossed paths on the street, they would perceive me as though I were imperceptible. At first it hurt, but with time, I came to the realization that it hurt less than it had while they were in my life. Tommy, however, was unable to let well enough alone. He came in with several of his pals one day when I was working at the cafe. His smile told me right once that this was no accident. Well, when I walked over to their table, he gave a big drawl. Guys, look who it is. After graduating from college, my sister, the waitress, continued to serve coffee. His pal snickered, living the dream. I took out my order pad while maintaining a neutral expression. Greetings from Sunshine Cafe. What am I able to get you? Oh, I'm not sure. Tommy pretended to read the menu. What would you suggest? You know a lot about inexpensive meals, don't you? His pals laughed again. For the following 20 minutes, Tommy ordered and returned everything I had brought. The coffee was too hot, then too cold, and everyone complained about it. That there was too much mayo on one sandwich and then not enough. Perhaps if you had done some valuable research rather than simply fleeing your house. As I cleaned their table, he spoke loudly. This work would not be a dead end for you. I kept cleaning the table, recalling Aunt Sarah's words, even though I wanted to tell him that I wasn't stuck somewhere, and that I chose to work here while I worked towards my true professional objectives. Some people can only feel large by making others feel little because they are so tiny on the inside. I got an entry-level job with Anderson & Mills Consulting after I graduated from college. Although the pay wasn't great, it was consistent, and more significantly, it gave you a foot in the door. I approached the assignment with the same zeal that had carried me through my academic career. I located a modest one-bedroom flat across town after receiving my second salary check. I informed Uncle Mark and Sarah that I was leaving. They both started crying. Do you really want to remain any longer? As she helped me pack, Aunt Sarah inquired. Here, you are always welcome. I gave her a strong embrace. I understand, but it's time for me to take charge of my life. In addition to others, you will become tired of me because I am so frequent, and I fulfilled my pledge. Every holiday, every Sunday meal, and some evening visits. I assured them that they remained a part of my family. When Emma needed a respite from college life, she would come over to my flat for sister sleepovers, and I would assist her with her homework, much as Uncle Mark had previously assisted me. I climbed the corporate ladder throughout the years, weekend projects, late nights, and extra certificates. I took any necessary action. My perseverance paid off. By the time I was 28, I had risen to the position of Senior Operations Director, with a staff of 30, and making more money than I could have ever imagined. I'm considering purchasing a home. One Sunday, while having supper with Aunt Sarah and Uncle Mark, I made the announcement. Something with a pool, perhaps, or a lovely garden. Aunt Sarah smiled and said, That's fantastic. That recalls me, I see. Last week, I met your mom at the supermarket. I made an effort to let her know how well you were doing. Perhaps, I reasoned, after all these years? She gave a headshake. Before I could say anything more, she interrupted. Claims she doesn't care what you're doing and doesn't have a daughter. Like poison, the words lingered in the air. Uncle Mark grabbed my hand and gave it a squeeze. I wasn't depressed, though. In fact, I felt completely clear about what I needed to do for the first time in years. I gave my friend Jennifer, a realtor, a call the following day. I'm in need of a favor, Jen. Are you able to identify the owner of the residence located at 1247 Maple Street? Jennifer returned the call with the owner's number. The property had been owned by Mr. Peterson for more than 20 years. My family had been renting it the whole time. As I dialed his number, my hand trembled a little. Riley Anderson is my name, Mr. Peterson. I would like to purchase your Maple Street property. I'm willing to pay 20% more than the going rate. Cash transaction. Close quickly. I signed the last documents 2 weeks later, while seated in a lawyer's office. I couldn't help but smile as I wrote my name on the final page. I now owned the home where I had endured so much suffering. Tommy and my parents continued to reside there, oblivious to the fact that their landlord had changed. The next day, I gave Jennifer another call. I asked for one more favor. As their real estate agent, could you get in touch with my parents? Inform them that the new owner of the house wants to see it and talk about their lease. Don't mention my name, please. Oh, this is going to be fun. Jennifer chuckled. When do you want to do it? We arranged the date for the following Tuesday. I spent the morning checking the property records, making sure everything was in perfect order before I headed to my former residence. My heart was beating, but not from fear, from anticipation. The house looked precisely the same as when I'd left it 6 years earlier. I rang the doorbell, Mom opened the door, and for a second we simply gazed at each other. Her face swung from astonishment to shock to rage. Just a few seconds. What are you doing here, Riley? She made a demand. I heard Tommy's heavy footsteps coming down the stairs. Then Dad emerged behind her. Leave now. Dad lost his temper. We are awaiting a significant individual. The home's new owner is scheduled to visit and have a look around. With a smile, I took the deed out of my briefcase. He's already here, I see. The house was purchased by me 2 weeks ago. Do you want to view the supporting documentation? The ensuing hush was deafening. Tommy's jaw was hanging wide when he reached the foot of the steps. That is? It's not possible, Dad stumbled. As a senior operations director at one of the leading consulting firms in the city, it is actually quite achievable. As I walked past them and inside the home, I answered, "My home." My offer made Mr. Peterson very delighted. It was almost funny how their faces changed. Riley, Mom's frown turned into a sickly sweet grin. "My dear, yes, she could. Would you mind taking a seat? I'll prepare some tea." Dad swiftly added, "We can catch up like a proper family." Family? I couldn't contain my laughter. When I was unable to pay their exorbitant rent, the same family evicted me from their home. This is the same family that claimed to have no daughter. Mom began, "Now, Riley, all we wanted to do was teach you responsibility." "Oh, I did learn to be responsible," I interrupted her. "I did a great job learning it. Actually, let's talk about your updated rental conditions." I doubled the amount they had been paying each month. Their faces lost their color. "That isn't feasible," Tommy blew up. "That's beyond our means. Where can we expect to find such a sum of money?" I shrugged, repeating what they had said years before. "It's not my issue. You have till the 1st of the next month to either move out or pay the increased charge." They trailed me to the entrance. Their voice veered quickly between threatening and begging. I resisted Mom's attempt to take my arm. "Please, Riley," she pleaded. "Are we members of your family?" "No," I answered firmly. "The day you put your comfort ahead of your daughter's future, you cease to be my family. You've got 30 days to make a decision." After a month, I watched from the other side of the street as Tommy and my parents packed their final possessions onto a moving truck. Over the last few weeks, they have made several attempts to contact me, alternating between pleading for more time and threatening to take legal action. I hadn't picked up any calls. Mom was the first to notice me. Dad looked up from the box he was carrying when she gave him a little shove. You could see the anger in their eyes. Tommy glared at me and slammed the back door of the truck with needless force. They didn't say anything to me. They just got into their cars and left the house they had rented for more than 20 years. I walked up to my property after waiting for them to leave. My land. I could still feel the strangeness of the words. I walked inside after unlocking the front door. Emptier yet still laden with memories, the home felt larger now. I extensively refurbished the house over the course of the following 3 months. An open-concept living area was created by tearing down the walls that had seen my tears. The kitchen, where I had spent many hours preparing meals for an unappreciative family, had been completely renovated. Tommy's valuable gaming space. With built-in bookcases and lots of windows, my former bedroom was converted into a home office. Every alteration was like wiping out another unpleasant memory. The markings where I had previously measured my height alone since no one else wanted to do it were removed when the contractor removed the old wallpaper. A new hardwood floor replaced the groaning floorboard that had always betrayed my late-night study sessions, and elegant tiles took the place of the discolored carpet that had endured years of spills that I had to clean up. When I presented her Uncle Mark and Emma the grand tour, Aunt Sarah remarked, "It looks fantastic." The home no longer even seems to be the same. I led them to the new back deck and said, "That's the point." My favorite home improvement. My real family and I sat there sipping lemonade while taking in the sunset over the backyard where a swing set used to be. A garden was now beginning to grow, with mill life emerging from the ancient soil. After that day, Tommy and my parents moved out, and I never saw them again. I occasionally heard vague rumors about them from others in the neighborhood. They relocated to a little flat on the other side of town. When Tommy realized that flat life wasn't for him, he ultimately moved out on his own. But I no longer cared about their lives. Here, in this refurbished home free of ghosts, was my life. I had at last discovered what I had been searching for all along, with Sunday meals with Aunt Sarah and Uncle Mark's, movie evenings with Emma, and holiday festivities full of sincere love and joy. The basic fact that family isn't about blood or duty, not retaliation, nor achievement. It all comes down to love, support, and deciding to always be there for one another. Story 5. I'm Chloe, and my parents split when I was 14 years old. It wasn't the kind of split that you see in movies. No hurling clothing out of windows or yelling contests. Only two individuals realized they could no longer make it work. Mom began dating again very soon after Dad relocated many states away. Richard came into our life in this way. At first, Richard appeared to be a decent person. He made my mother laugh, wore nice clothes, and had a decent position at some major corporation. However, there was something unsettling about the way he gazed at me, right from the start, not in a spooky manner, worse in a critical sense, as if I were some sort of issue that required his attention. Your daughter needs some direction. About a month after he moved in, one evening I heard him telling his mother, "She's at that challenging age." Mom's response made my stomach turn as I was standing in the hallway. "I am aware. I'm really happy you're available to assist." However, it didn't help. With a smile that never quite made it to his eyes, it was criticism cloaked in phony care. Little remarks regarding my hair or attire were made at first. Then everything got out of hand. I recall the first time he truly affected me. About 6 months after he and his mother were married, it happened over dinner. I was dressed in brand new pants that I had purchased with my allowance. "Chloe, those jeans are starting to fit you a little snug." Halfway to his lips, Richard paused his fork and spoke. "You're developing so quickly." Then he said something loud enough for me to hear, primarily. Tears were on the verge of streaming down my face. "This is how they should fit." I was able to say, "Oh, sweetheart." Mom got right in. "Richard is just worried about your well-being." Teenagers sometimes fail to notice these things, do you know? That was the trend. When Richard would say something hurtful under the pretext of care, Mom would support him. She would shake her head and claim I was being overly sensitive each time I attempted to express how his remarks affected me. "Chloe, you have to learn to take a joke," she would say that, while Richard sat there grinning smugly. "All he's doing is attempting to protect you." After that, I called my dad more frequently. I was saved by our Skype conversations. Without attempting to justify Richard's actions or claiming that I was exaggerating, he would actually listen to me. He continued to make monthly alimony payments, which I eventually found to be more than adequate. However, the situation at home could not be resolved by money. With the birth of my half-brother, everything changed. At the age of 17, I was attempting to concentrate on my senior year of high school, while our home became a monument to Richard's ideal little family. Except for me, of course. Mom was very engrossed on the infant. I understand. He was little, adorable, and in need of continual care, but I seemed to have vanished into thin air overnight. Only until something went wrong did nobody appear to notice me. Like the time I shut my bedroom door too loudly and unintentionally awakened the baby. After the kid was born, I thought Richard would get even worse and find more reasons to be critical of me. However, an unforeseen event occurred. He began to travel frequently for work. My redemption came from those business travels. When he was gone, the house felt lighter, as if I could breathe again. Mom even appeared more at ease. My senior year went better than I had anticipated, despite the fact that she was constantly counting down the days until his return because Richard was away so much. I joined the yearbook committee, concentrated on my studies, and began planning for college. Actual plans, not just escape fantasies. Dad kept his word and showed up on graduation day. As I crossed the stage to receive my diploma, he was sitting in the audience, grinning proudly. Mom was also present, Richard and the baby, of course. However, I searched the crowd for my father's face. My father took me aside after the ceremony. "Chloe, I meant what I said earlier." With his hands on my shoulders, he told me, "You can attend any college you like. I'll see it through. You deserve it." In the hopes that at least one college would accept me, I had already applied to a number of them. They all did, which surprised me. However, I was certain of the one I desired, the one in the city of Dad. I would not have to return home frequently because it was far away. However, close enough to someone who genuinely looked out for me. I didn't tell Mom and Richard until after dinner. The table was where we were seated. Richard complained about the airline food from his most recent trip, while Mom fed my brother. Every college I applied to accepted me. During a brief period of silence, I said, "I'm going to take Marshall University's offer." In midair, Mom passed the baby spoon. That's where your father lives, isn't it?" I nodded, ready myself for their reaction. "Well," Richard murmured, that same mocking smirk creeping across his face. "Looks like your father finally got to accomplish something meaningful with his life paying for education. Who would have thought?" I grabbed my fork so hard my knuckles became white. The impulse to lash back at him, to tell him just what I felt of his beneficial addition to my life, was almost overwhelming, but I restrained my tongue. I didn't want to give him the gratification of watching me lose my calm. Mom breathed out a little sigh of what sounded disturbingly like relief. Maybe she was delighted to finally have me out of the way, free to focus on her actual family without the difficult residue of her prior marriage lingering about. The next morning, I packed all I could fit into 2 bags and a backpack. Mom was too occupied with the baby to see me carrying my stuff downstairs, and Richard had already left for work. Dad arranged for a car service to bring me up, and by that evening I was standing in front of his house, a lovely 2-story colonial with a wraparound porch. It was so different from the small place I had left behind. But it wasn't simply the magnitude that hit me. It was the warmth. Dad was waiting at the door with his fiancée, Sarah. I had not anticipated her. She had vivid red hair, paint, and clothes that were soiled, and she was younger than her mother. She hugged me tightly, as if we had been pals for ages. She grabbed one of my suitcases and said, "We have your room ready." I may have gone a little too far with the decorations, if that's okay with you. The space was ideal. It had a window seat that looked out onto the backyard and was serene and elegant. Mel. I'm weeping. Criticism from Mel Richard. Mel is being cautious. Just tranquilly. That evening, after seeing my note, Mom called. She seemed offended and replied, "You could have said goodbye properly. All day long your brother searched for you. He's too motherly. He won't remember my presence." Soon enough, during those initial weeks, I adjusted to my new existence. Learning more about Sarah. She had a knack of making everyone feel at ease while teaching art at the nearby high school. We would speak about everything and nothing, while occasionally sipping hot chocolate late into the night. Dad offered to help me out totally, but I wanted to be on my own. The daily grind, a bustling cafe close to the house, is where I got a job. Although it wasn't a glamorous job, I liked it. My teammates were entertaining, the usual clients were kind, and the tips were reasonable. I moved into Marshall University's dormitories in the autumn. Jenny, my roommate, was a Chicago music major who often brought me coffee and studied violin at strange hours. I was studying business administration and was enjoying my lessons when she returned from her early morning rehearsals. I worked at the cafe in between lectures and study sessions. This was how a year went by, and I was content. Very content. Until a typical Tuesday afternoon at the cafe turned everything upside down. My stomach dropped when I heard a familiar laugh when I was cleaning tables. Richard was seated at a corner table, but he was not alone himself, and he was most certainly not traveling for work. They were kissing like first dating teens, and he was with a lady I had never seen before. "Lisa, hello." I tried not to shake my voice as I whispered to my coworker, "Could you please take table 12? I must go take a rest." With my pulse racing through the little window in the door, I ducked into the rear room. They were still visible to me. As I took out my phone and began recording, my hands were shaking. Looking at her the way he used to stare at his mother in the early days, Richard was now grasping the woman's hand across the table, when they eventually departed. I was still lurking in the rear when Lisa discovered me. What was the purpose of that? With a worried expression, she questioned, "Were those individuals familiar to you?" "The guy," I spoke slowly. "He is someone I know. I simply didn't want him to notice that I was employed here." "Who was the woman, do you know?" Lisa's eyes glowed with rumors. "God, oh God, indeed. Catherine Morrison is that person. Everyone is familiar with her. Because of her economic success and charitable endeavors, She is frequently featured in the local press. I had trouble sleeping that night. I couldn't get the picture of Richard kissing that woman out of my head. My fingers shaking, I reached for my laptop at midnight and opened social media, typing Catherine Morrison into the search box. Her profile appeared right away, complete with a confirmed checkmark. Richmond Technologies CEO. In the gloom of my dorm room, I read aloud to myself. Richard was employed by the same firm. He was seeing Catherine Morrison, but she wasn't just any lady. She was the director of the entire firm and his employer. There was more to his affair than that. He was having an affair with his own boss. Things worsened when I scrolled down her timeline, much worse. Richard appeared in one picture after another, him at business functions. At what appeared to be vacation locations, he was always standing near to Catherine while the other staff members kept a reasonable distance. Both of them were smiling at the camera as he held the young child, who was about 3 years old. One especially upsetting picture included the message, "My 2 favorite men in the world. I am eager to make it official as soon as possible. Happy family engagement." As I continued to browse, the evidence grew stronger. There were pictures from years and years ago. Richard's numerous work travels. Mom was at home by herself with my brother throughout all of those occasions. He had been creating an entirely different life, replete with a second child. As I began saving the pictures one by one, my hands were trembling so much that I nearly dropped my phone. I downloaded every one of them, even the caption screenshots. Richard was there for what appeared to be the boys' birthday celebration. Christmas supper with Richard and Catherine. On a swing, Richard pushes the youngster. I was really struck by one picture. It showed Richard, Catherine, and their kid at a fun fair around 6 months earlier. It said in the caption, "The ideal family might occasionally appear out of the blue." I am very grateful that my Prince Charming waited patiently for the ideal time to begin our family. At last, true love was meant to be. Have the patience to wait. He was not waiting. He had been telling lies, leading 2 very distinct lives, balancing 2 families like a crazy circus performer. Furthermore, it appears from Catherine's writings that she was unaware that she was the other lady. With her attractive subordinate who had captured her heart, she genuinely thought she had discovered her happily ever after. My thoughts were racing as I reclined in my chair. I didn't recognize the Richard in these pictures at all. He was grinning here. Not smirks, but genuine grins. He gave me everything. He appeared to be truly delighted, hugging his hidden fiancée, playing with his secret son, and going about his secret existence. I muttered to my lonely room, "Oh, Mom. How has he affected us?" It was almost 3 a.m. when I checked the time. Sleep was the last thing on my mind, but I had an early class tomorrow. I had to make sure that all of the evidence was stored. This would have to be shown to Mom. Even though it would be detrimental to all parties, the truth had to be revealed. I was on the train, going home, a week later. My gut was in knots, and the proof was still burning a hole in my phone. I hadn't disclosed my destination to my father. I couldn't have explained to him why I had to do this. When Mom answered the door, her expression was one of genuine surprise. "We didn't expect you, Chloe." For a brief while, my younger brother's tottering around her legs seemed almost natural. Richard then emerged from behind them. He responded, "Well, well." His voice was already beginning to take on that familiar tone of mockery. "Don't tell me you have to return home after being expelled from college due to poor marks." Mom chuckled as if that were the most hilarious joke she had ever heard. "Stop it, Richard. Chloe is doing well at school. Is I right, honey?" I made an effort to grin. "In fact, I'm on the dean's list." "You are, of course." Richard looked me up and down and grinned. "Say that each time I see you, those jeans become bigger and bigger. Is that the current fashion trend? The loose appearance?" Since I started college, I've truly lost weight, I'll bet my tongue. I had learned a lot from all those cooks who were rushing around the cafe. However, Richard was always making fun of my appearance. Every time I moved during the day, the remarks persisted. Richard always had something to say when I talked. It worsened when Mom brought dinner. As I placed some mashed potatoes on my plate, he said, "Well there, Chloe." For the rest of us, save some. I continued to eat in silence while keeping a sidelong glance at him. Just last week, same man who was sitting here making fun of me had been playing happy families with his employer. Another life, another child. The same man. Sweetheart. He turned to face his mother with a worried, inflated look. We may need to purchase a second refrigerator if Chloe plans to visit more frequently. Mom laughed and looked at him so lovingly that my chest ached. In fact, she didn't know. With all the evidence of his treachery on it, my phone felt heavy in my pocket. Shall I show her? Observing her expression, so devoted to this man who had been deceiving her for years. I paused. Still unsure of what to do, I went upstairs to my former room after supper. However, I was halted on the steps by Richard's voice. Where are you heading, in your opinion? Confused, I turned around. To my chamber, your space. He chuckled. Now that's my office. Months ago we converted it. Your mother told you, didn't she? My brother was being bounced on Mom's hip when she came into the corridor. Oh, I should have mentioned it. I can take a nap on the sofa. I tried to sound steady as I offered. Richard gave a head shake. You will obstruct the path. Tonight you'd better return to university. I glanced at my mother, hoping she would disagree and defend my suggestion of an alternative. Rather, she simply nodded. Richard is correct, my dear. You would be better off finding another place to stay tonight. Something broke inside of me. Perhaps it was the way my mother avoided looking at me. Perhaps it was the arrogant look on Richard's face, but I'd had enough. Why do you do this every time? My voice trembled as I turned to face my mother. You constantly side with him. But why? See how he treats me, don't you? How has he consistently handled me? Mom seemed uneasy as she moved my brother to her other hip. You're being dramatic, Chloe. Richard simply enjoys making jokes. You've been overly sensitive all along. Make jokes. I laughed resentfully. Is that considered continual ridicule? The remarks on my life, my clothing, and my weight. Mom, he despises me. I've always been disliked by him. Furthermore, you have never defended me. With that uncontrollable smile remaining on his face, Richard took a step forward. Let's not let this become another one of your adolescent outbursts, Chloe. Quit talking. I took out my phone with shaky hands. You are no longer allowed to speak. I brought the first picture up to his face after pulling it up. It had an instant impact. His cheeks lost all of their color. What is that? Mom looked at the screen and inquired. Richard, what's the matter? Do you want to tell your mother about the types of work travels you have been going on? I go on to the next picture. His other son in the picture. Or perhaps you want to share your fiancé with her. Your boss at Richmond Technologies, you know, the one with whom you are parents. Mom's jaw dropped. I could hear the wall clock ticking since the room was so silent. That's not the case. Finally losing his smile, Richard stuttered. Not what? These pictures are not of your son. Catherine Morrison is not being kissed by you, not the 2-week-old news of your engagement. I looked at my mother. For years, he has been leading a double life. Mom. He has gone on several business travels with his other family members, his other son, and to arrange his wedding to a woman who is unaware that he is already married. You're telling lies. Mom seldom spoke above a whisper. I wish I was. With his employer, he has been unfaithful to you. Together, they have a 3-year-old boy. She believes they will be married and that he is not dating. Quit! My brother started weeping when Mom screamed, Put an end to these terrible falsehoods. You dare? You have no right to fabricate such horrible tales about Richard. I have evidence, Mom. Examine the pictures. Examine the dates. Take a look. Nothing is worth looking at. Richard has always been loathed by you. You have consistently attempted to obstruct us. He's a greater parent to your brother than your own father was to you, and that's why you're envious. Her remarks were like a blow to my head. She rushed to the front door, ripped it open, and flung my backpack onto the front yard while I stood there in disbelief. Leave now. She was in tears. Right now. Anger flushed her face. Leave our residence. I'm done listening to your falsehoods. With legs that felt like lead, I made my way to the door. Richard's smile had become even wider as I walked by him. As I went by, he leaned in close and said in a voice that only I could hear, Chloe, your mother will always trust me more than you. Keep it in mind. I was in a stupor the whole way back to college via train, my mother's comments replaying in my mind. After a restless night, the next morning. I went to Catherine Morrison's social media page after opening my laptop. Before I clicked, my cursor lingered over the message button for a considerable amount of time. I need you to know some vital facts about your fiancé, Miss Morrison. Are you open to having a face-to-face meeting? Within an hour, she responded about Richard. Naturally. Is everything all right? At the daily grind, we decided to meet. It was oddly her proposal. She was unaware that I was employed there, or that I had initially learnt of her presence at that particular cafe. I changed into my uniform, got to work early, and waited. Catherine Morrison entered the room at precisely 2 p.m. Catherine. I went up to her table. My name is Chloe. Her grin was even, pleasant, and sincere. Sit down, please. In your communication, you looked worried. What's going on here, Richard? I inhaled deeply. I want to apologize to you before I show you anything. Yes, I am. Her smile wavered. What am I sorry for? I took out my phone and went to the gallery of pictures. This is my mum. I showed her a recent family photo while I spoke. And here is Richard, her spouse. My stepfather. Catherine gazed intently at the picture. As she reached for her coffee cup, her immaculately manicured hand froze. I don't get it. My mother and him had been wed for many years. Together, they have a 2-year-old boy, my younger brother. I moved my finger to another picture. It was taken during Christmas. No. She gave a headshake. No, that isn't feasible. Richard does not have a spouse. According to him, he has never been married. In the spring, we will tie the knot. We have a son. I am aware of your son, I said softly. Richard informed you he was single, and I am aware of that. He has been leading 2 separate lives. Father and husband in one city, father and fiancé in another. Her coffee grew cold as she sat in quiet for a long time. After all this time, she eventually confided to his ailing mother about all those business trips home. He was returning home to his other child, his wife. She chuckled bitterly. God, what an idiot I am. I made him regional director and gave him 3 promotions. I believed that he loved me. I apologized once again since I had run out of things to say. Don't be. The CEO mask fell back into place as she straightened her back. I appreciate you being honest with me. I now realize that he was only taking advantage of my power and position. She got up and gathered her belongings. I have some calls to make if you don't mind. Thank you. Chloe. Really? With her heels tapping on the floor, I watched her leave the cafe. She held her head high, in spite of everything. Compared to my mother, she was stronger. I believed she was capable of facing reality. My phone rang a week after Catherine and I had met. It was Mum, and she was yelling before I could even greet her. Are you content now? I had to keep the phone away from my ear since her voice was so loud. Are you at last content? Everything is damaged by you. What, Mom? They let him go. His employer, that lady. She caused him to lose his job. They discovered infractions after auditing all of his work. He's getting thousands of dollars from them. His career is finished. Her words came in short gasps, and now she was crying. He will never be hired again by any reputable organization, and you are solely to blame. With my legs feeling weak, I sank down on my bed in my dorm room. He was unfaithful to you, Mom. He had a different family, a kid. He intended to wed her. You have no understanding, she interrupted me. He's the greatest thing I've ever experienced. Your sibling deserved no better parent. You have no right to attempt to ruin that. You two were being used by him, Catherine and you. All he was doing was using everyone to his advantage. Do you not notice that? You have no right to discuss him in such a manner. Her tone became icy. I adore this man more than anything in the world, and you have no right to condemn him. Please, Mom, I don't have a daughter. They sounded like bullets. From my perspective, you are no longer there. The cue died. I sat there looking at my phone for a long time. Tears are streaming down my face. When Jenny returned from class, she discovered me in that state. What happened, Chloe? Oh my God. I told her everything. She helped me contact my father, offered me tea, and held me as I sobbed. That evening, he and Sarah came up to see how I was doing. You made the correct decision. Sarah held my hand and continued to speak. Even if doing the right thing might be extremely painful at times, it is still right. It has been a year since then. I continue to work at the cafe and maintain good marks at Marshall University. A little ceremony by the lake marked the marriage of Dad and Sarah. It was lovely. I was also the maid of honor for them. Sarah is expecting a child. I will shortly get a younger sibling. Through common acquaintances back home, I learn about Mom and Richard. He was never hired by another corporation. News of the audit results spread. He began drinking excessively and starting altercations at pubs. To provide for them, Mom had to work at the neighborhood store. Since they can no longer afford a babysitter as they once could, my younger brother is currently enrolled in nursery. I sometimes question if I should feel bad about not being able to sleep. Perhaps everyone would have been better off if I had remained silent. Mom would continue to enjoy her ignorance. Richard would continue to work. My brother's household would be more secure. However, I recall Richard grinning when his mother interrupted him with hushed words. "I will always be trusted by your mother more than you are." I recall all the years he spent subtly hurting me, manipulating me, and twisting everything to make me feel insignificant. No, I'm not sympathetic to them. That's the truth. Convenience and comfort aren't always important to it. It simply is. Lies were the foundation of Richard's life, and he had only himself to blame when those lies eventually came to an end. Story 6. The title of this piece is At My Father's Funeral. Since he is the biological son, and I am only my mother's child from a prior marriage, my brother sought the entire fortune. I said, 0. All right, I've given it up, but don't ever get in touch with me again. Like I would, he grinned and said. The inheritance is all mine after 3 months. Hello, everyone. I've been putting this story off for a while, but I've now realized how crazy it is all because of current events. It never occurred to me that my life would become a complex family drama. However, here we are. Maybe you can tell me whether I handled it correctly once I lay everything out for you, or if I'm as dysfunctional as my brother. This is how everything became so disorganized. Liam, my 23-year-old brother, and I didn't have the ideal family structure while we were growing up, but it wasn't a complete catastrophe either. Our dads were different, but our moms were the same. In no way was my biological father involved. Mom claims that Dad left when I was only a toddler, leaving her to raise me alone. Actually, I don't remember anything about him. Only a few old pictures and hazy tales of how, when I was around 4, he ran off with another lady. Liam's father, Anthony, was someone Mom met. In every aspect, Anthony was the complete antithesis of my biological father. He was trustworthy, stable, and truly kind. Even though he wasn't required to, he treated me as his own from the beginning. Even before he and his mother were married, I recall how he would take me out for ice cream or tell me stories before bed. Anthony went one step further and formally adopted me when he married my mother. I wasn't really sure what that meant at the time, but in hindsight, it was significant. It was more than simply paperwork. It was a declaration. He wanted everyone to know that I was his child in every manner that counted, even though he didn't have to. I recall the day my mother informed me of the adoption. She sat me down and told me that Anthony had seen a lawyer to formalize the arrangement. I still recall Mom stating, "This is Anthony's way of saying you're his no matter what," even though I was only a young child at the time. Anthony didn't treat me as the child of a prior marriage after that. He attended every parent-teacher conference, every school performance, and every small turning point in between. "It doesn't matter whose blood flows through your veins," he would tell me. "My daughter is you." I've always remembered that, particularly as I grew older. Being aware that Anthony didn't have to pick me gave me a sense of belonging that I had never experienced before. That's why I never questioned Anthony's love for me, even when Liam subsequently began to undermine me. Liam was born a few years later. Having a younger brother thrilled me. The fact that we officially only had one parent in common didn't matter to me. I adored him, and he was simply my baby brother to me. We had a very typical sibling connection when we were kids. On Saturday mornings, we would connect over TV, play together, and argue over toys. For the initial years, everything was going well. But then tragedy happened, and everything was different. Mom died in a vehicle accident while Liam was in middle school, and I was 17, preparing for college. For me, it was abrupt and unanticipated. It was like losing my safety net when Mom passed away. No matter how terrible things went, she was the one who always knew what to say to make them feel better. The home felt quieter and colder when she left, as if life had been sucked from it. Despite Anthony's best efforts, there were some things that only Mom could do, similar to the quiet hum she had made when folding clothes, or how, without ever raising her voice without her, Mom had managed to persuade Liam and me to stop arguing. We all seemed to be attempting to regain our ability to operate. And none of us made a mistake. We were all devastated by her passing. However, it was a breaking point for Liam. Liam let out a scream during the funeral. "Why was Mom's death necessary? You ought to have done it. If the step-sibling disappeared, no one would notice." Any remaining love I could have had for him simply disappeared when I heard it, which made me feel completely exhausted. Despite my strong want to clap back at him, I chose to remain mute. However, the generally composed and level-headed Anthony lost it. I had never witnessed Dad reprimand Liam in front of everyone before, but no amount of shouting could repair the harm. From then on, Liam and I never had the same connection again. Liam changed once his mother passed away. He began to hold me responsible for everything. I was somehow to blame if things went wrong. I attempted to attribute it to misdirected rage. Being young, he must have been overwhelmed by the abrupt loss of his mother. At times, I questioned whether Liam's resentment began before we were even aware of it. Little traits like his constant need to win, even in the tiniest fights, or his tendency to become too attached to Anthony were examples. Whenever I was complimented on anything during a family meal. When Anthony told me that I did a great job on a school project, Liam instantly poured his heart out on the table, then started crying since no one liked him. I believed he was being theatrical at the moment. It seems to me now like a sneak peek at what was to come, an inability to share the spotlight, and a drive to be the center of attention all the time. I suppose it was simpler for him to portray me as an outsider than to confront his own fears, even while we were family. However, his anger remained constant throughout time. It expanded. Liam began making light of me, particularly the fact that our fathers were different. Liam began making light of me, particularly the fact that our fathers were different. He would remark things like, "You're just a stepkid," or "You're not really part of this family." I initially dismissed it, assuming it was simply his grieving process. However, it became evident as he grew older that he truly felt I didn't belong. Liam's attitude grew intolerable by the time he reached his late teens. When it came to grades, employment, or anything else, he was always striving to outdo me. He took it personally when he was rejected from both his top institution and his ideal secondary school. In the meantime, I had earned my college degree and secured a respectable position at the municipal office. Liam saw it as competition, rather than a moment of joy for me. Being Anthony's biological son was the only thing Liam could hold on to. He began to show it out as if it were a badge of pride. He would add, "I'm Dad's real son," as though it would somehow improve him. It was draining. For his part, Anthony never showed us any different treatment than he did. In every manner that mattered, I was his daughter. Liam, however, had a different perspective. He pretended that I was robbing him of something, Anthony's affection. Whatever, pay attention. I moved out as quickly as I could. I needed time away from Liam and all of his negativity. I was sick of being pulled into his problems all the time, but I didn't dislike him. I used to plan my visits to Anthony so that Liam wouldn't be around. The drama wasn't worth it. However, Liam spent his whole college years at home with Anthony. "I'm here to he said, framing it as being responsible or loyal. But now, without him, I felt unmoored. But let's be honest, I didn't have a clue. Anthony simply didn't want to leave the comforts of home. He didn't need to look after Liam. Liam contacted me to boast when he got his first job after graduating from college, not to catch up or anything. "Your modest city office job is nothing compared to the one I landed at a much better corporation." "Oh," he said, "Dad's genes must be it. I suppose being the genuine son pays off." All I did was roll my eyes. Although Liam had always been competitive, he was now downright annoying. I immediately made the decision to further isolate myself. Life is too short to put up with such negativity. Then Anthony unexpectedly died. It was like losing my anchor when I lost him. His constant presence has always been taken for granted by me, but now that he was gone, I felt free. However, I had no idea that his passing would cause such a disaster. My already tense relationship with Liam would worsen as a result. It was intended to be a time of mourning and farewell during Anthony's burial. Naturally, though, Liam had to start talking about himself as soon as he arrived late, as he often does. I was aware that things would not go well. He didn't even acknowledge those who had been waiting for him or offer an apology. Rather, he entered as if he owned the space. I had been deeply affected by Anthony's death. He was more than simply my stepfather. He was my father, in every manner that was significant. Since Liam either couldn't be bothered or believed it wasn't his duty, I made the most of the preparations alone. On the day of the funeral, when the ceremony came to a finish and people began to go, he arrived as a guest rather than family. At last, Liam made the decision to take the big step. I was expressing my gratitude to some of the participants for their attendance. "We must discuss Dad's inheritance," Liam murmured, grabbing my arm. "How are you holding up? Not even..." Perhaps a brief period of contemplation over Anthony's life. Let's go right to the point. I drew Liam away from the last few guests who were still present. I didn't want a full-blown incident at Anthony's burial, not because I wanted to save him humiliation. Now what? Already irritated and ready for whatever shit he was about to spit forth? I asked. With that smug smile he usually had when he felt he was outwitting everyone, he leaned against the wall. "It is easy," he said, as if he were teaching a kid arithmetic. "Since I am my father's biological child, I should clearly inherit all he left me." Half uncertain if he was serious, I blinked. Even for Liam, this was low. "Are you serious?" I inquired. "Not at all." Crossing his arms, he fired back. "You aren't even his biological child. It would be absurd if you received anything. You are only your step-sibling. A stepson who requests money might come seen as avaricious. You're not really related." That hurt a lot, but I kept that from him. Since I was a young child, Anthony had been my father, adopting me legally and treating me as though I were his own. He never once gave me the impression that I wasn't his daughter. But Liam didn't care about all of that. The only thing that mattered to him was biology. "Are you serious?" I inquired, attempting to ascertain how he distorted this reasoning in his mind. "Of course I'm serious," he sneered. Instead of an outsider inheriting, Dad would have preferred his own son. The phrase outsider struck me more strongly than I cared to acknowledge. I was often reminded by Liam that I wasn't truly a member of the family in his view. I was aware that he wouldn't back down if I didn't, and I would start a fight. I'd rather not be in. Furthermore, I had no intention of wasting time arguing with him. I was already inconsolable at Anthony's passing, and I wasn't going to allow Liam to make me feel any worse. "Okay." Despite the fact that I was boiling inside, I said in a calm voice, "You can have everything, all of it. Here's the thing, though. You never get back to me, never. Not for cash, for assistance, for anything. We're finished." Liam grinned more broadly. "As if I would ever want to get in touch with you," he added, almost giggling. For a moment, I looked at him with a mixture of sorrow and rage. He may have believed he had won, but he was unaware of how everything would backfire. "Excellent," I answered. "Then we're in agreement." He stood there while I went away. There was a part of me that wanted to tell him the truth, that I had every right to half of the estate because Anthony had officially adopted me. However, I didn't. I didn't want to become even more like him or make this situation worse. I immediately went to a lawyer the next day to start the process of giving up my portion of the inheritance. When I explained my proposal to the lawyer, he appeared shocked. "Are you certain about this?" he inquired. "Good," I said. "I have no interest in becoming involved with it." The attorney clarified that I was entitled to an equal portion, as Anthony had legally adopted me. I didn't care, though. All I wanted was to get away from the turmoil. I phoned to inform Liam that the paperwork was complete. I said, "I've surrendered my portion, now it's all yours. Have fun." As he answered, I could hear the arrogance in his voice. "Excellent. It's about time. You made the correct decision." I didn't even try to answer. I simply hung up and made an effort to move on. I believed it would end there, that Liam would take his newfound fortune and permanently abandon me. I made it apparent that we were done and gave him the full inheritance, just as he had requested. No drama, no touch. Just two individuals leading different lifestyles. Naturally, though, he managed to pull me back into his mess. My phone was inundated with calls and texts 3 months after the funeral. Can you guess who it is? I initially disregarded it. I assumed he would finally get the message that he should never get in touch with me again. However, Liam persisted. I gave up and responded after the 15th missed call, mostly to want it to stop. Liam, what do you want? Not even trying to hide my annoyance, I said. His voice was strained as he said, I need money. Dad owed money. I left debts behind. What are you discussing? It was discovered that Anthony had some unpaid debts. Nothing extraordinary, just a few things that are doable. Similar to a small mortgage and auto loan. Naturally, Liam had spent all of Anthony's money in record time. He was now forced to make payments that he obviously hadn't budgeted for. What's wrong with me? I inquired. The debts aren't the only thing. Ignoring my question, Liam went on. Interest penalties are present. It's getting worse. I can't keep up, Morgan. You desired everything. Recall that I fired back. This is precisely what you requested. Liam's voice dropped. In a moment, he turned from appealing to accusing. Didn't you know about this? Because you are envious, you forced all of the debt upon me. My father's true son is me. Oh, the nerve! Initially, I said, attempting to maintain my composure. Until you mentioned the debts just now, I was unaware of them. Secondly, I instructed you to leave my life. So why are you phoning me now? He started talking about how unjust it was, how this shouldn't have to be his problem. I ought to have forewarned him. I didn't stay to listen to the others. I said, figure it out, Liam, and hung up. That was the beginning, but I assumed it would be the end. Liam gave another call a week later. He attempted a new strategy this time. He went into full victim mode rather than blaming me. Immediately following the burial, he acknowledged that he had squandered all of Anthony's funds. There was more to the story. He claimed to have used such. Liam, what are you not telling me? Following a little poking, A0 1305 19 0 13 26 23, not sure. But the others. Who knows? Trips devices, a new outfit. So Liam, what do you want from me? Knowing where this was headed, I asked. To settle the remaining debts, I need $8,000, he stated, as if that were the world's most sensible request. I was astounded by the boldness. You expect me to save you now that you've spent the entire fortune in 3 months. Morgan, I'm desperate, he said. I'll be all right if I can only pay off this debt. Yeah, I said. That's not happening. Why not? My sister is intended to be you. I lost it at that point. Liam, you've been treating me like trash for years. You referred to me as an outsider, a stepchild, and someone who wasn't related. Do you now want me to assist you become more realistic? Liam persisted, though. He arrived at my place of employment a few days later. I had no idea how he discovered my workplace. During my lunch break, however, he was waiting for me in the parking lot. Please, Morgan. He began to appear more unkempt than I had ever seen him. I'll do anything. Simply give me the money. I let out a sigh. I won't give you a cent, Liam. It's your mess. However, the auto loan has already been renegotiated. He objected. The house has been paid off, and it is now merely $5,000. To clean the remainder, I simply need a bit more. It seems like you're doing well already. I said. What is the issue, then? He paused, avoiding making eye contact. It dawned on me then. The tale was not over yet. Liam, what are you not telling me? It took some probing before he opened up. I bought too many things with the savings. I spent more than I had planned, borrowed funds to compensate from a buddy. He's threatening me now. I'm in serious trouble if I don't reimburse him right now. It was there. Anthony's finances weren't the only issue here. Liam's own careless spending had put him in a worse situation. He was now in a frenzy. You're amazing, I said. I didn't want anything to do with the inheritance for just this reason. Liam, you're incapable of handling accountability. You couldn't. I'm aware that I made a mistake, but I can solve it with your aid. Morgan, just $8,000. All I need is that. As he extended his hand, he begged me to just give him the money, as if I would give it to him immediately. I slapped his hand off of mine. I'm not going to pay. I spoke aggressively. You are to blame for this. You squandered the funds. You're now paying for the additional debt you took on. I'm not there to protect you. I slid it, and Liam rubbed his hand while glaring at me. His cheeks was flushed with annoyance. Why are you unable to just assist me? Because we are only half siblings. Is it the reason? Is that it? The worst are stepchildren. They are little more than strangers, yet they constantly act as though they have a right to everything. His remarks were painful. I wasn't going to let him see that, though. My stomach rumbled, but I maintained a calm demeanor. Liam, you've been treating me like I don't exist for years. You now desire my assistance. You are pitiful, not taking place. I pivoted, climbed into my vehicle, turned on the ignition, and then backed off. To get the final phrase in, I slightly rolled down the window. Do not return here ever again. I'll call the cops if you do, and good luck getting yourself out of the hole, by the way. You're not smart enough to quit digging. After that, I drove away, leaving him standing there furious and red-faced. I looked at him in the rearview mirror, though. The way he stood there, fuming, made me shiver for some reason. I sensed it in my stomach. Liam was determined not to let this pass. He seemed to be planning a means to retaliate against me already. And I am currently there. Whatever ludicrous or spiteful action he attempts next, I'm prepared for it. This is far from over, but I'll keep you folks updated. One update. Hello everyone, this is the promised update. It would have been too simple, of course, but I wish I could say Liam took the message and went on. If anything, things got worse, and to be honest, I should have anticipated it. The man was not going to ignore it. Not after the manner in which I silenced him. It began modestly. I began receiving odd messages on social media. They came from accounts with arbitrary usernames and no profile photos. You act as like you're superior to us, and your family doesn't abandon you the way you did. I initially disregarded them, thinking they were spam or automated responses, but the tone seemed familiar, as if the sender knew me. I had a terrible suspicion that Liam was manipulating things, but I was powerless to stop it without evidence. Then he would phone my workplace in the city and beg to talk to me. The receptionist didn't give it much thought at first. She thought he was merely a worried relative attempting to contact her. I would get texts from her like, "Your brother called again. Shall I advise him to try again later?" I dismissed it, assuming he would ultimately understand and cease. However, Liam lacks the ability to read a clue. The calls began to come in every day, sometimes even more than once. He was obviously not only attempting to contact me, he was purposefully bothering my colleagues. I was summoned to the department manager's office one day. She gave me a sticky note with Liam's name on it and appeared irritated. "Your brother has been calling all the time, Morgan," she replied, obviously irritated. "You've even been accused of hiding from him by him. What's happening?" I felt ashamed. Liam was more than a bother. He made a concerted effort to damage my reputation at work. I told her I would take care of it and apologized sincerely. In the hopes that it might slow him down, I blocked his number. However, I ought to have known better. As I described the scenario to the man, one of my coworkers who witnessed the exchange, he did not back down, but instead doubled down. Smiling, she added, "Your sibling seems to need a pastime." Trying to lighten the atmosphere, she said, "Perhaps we ought to buy him a therapist or one of those paint-by-numbers kits." Even though I was appreciative of her efforts to ease the tension, I laughed. She had been a silent support system during all of Liam's shenanigans and was one of the few individuals who knew the whole tale. Liam chooses to escalate in spite of my repeated attempts to interrupt him. He arrived at my office one morning without warning or invitation, not prowling outside the building or waiting in the parking lot in silence. No, Liam would have found that too subtle. He went directly to the front desk and began to scream at the receptionist. "Now I have to talk to Morgan." His voice reverberated around the foyer as he barked, "I won't leave till I see her since she has been avoiding me." Liam refused to be calmed down by the poor receptionist's attempts. "Are you aware of who I am?" he yelled. "Her brother is me. After all, family comes first. Or is everyone here too preoccupied with kissing Morgan's ass to notice that? I was embarrassed, angry, and incredulous as I observed him through the glass doors of my office. Even though my hands were shaking, I made myself remain calm. How did this happen? My life was in disarray because the younger sibling I had once helped with schoolwork was now shouting at my coworkers. I ducked into the restroom, locked the door, and drew a trembling breath as security eventually dragged him away. I tried to quiet the tempest brewing inside of me by splattering cold water over my face. What if I've done this completely incorrectly? For a time, I muttered to myself. Doubt began to creep in. Perhaps I ought to have taken a different approach. However, I recalled his arrogant, conceited expression and told myself that I wasn't responsible for cleaning up this mess. I could hear him shouting in the background as she called me in a panic. I didn't even make an effort to go to the front. Instead, I dialed security. Liam resisted leaving when the guard showed up. He caused quite a stir, yelling that I was abandoning my family and that I was too powerful to assist him. Morgan, do you believe you're superior to me? As the guards led him away, he smirked. Being employed by the government in a menial capacity does not make you unique. He turned to look at me through the glass doors before he left. It's not over yet. This is something you will regret. I was enraged. By bringing up my employment and his stupidity, Liam had gone too far. It was no longer just about me. My reputation, my coworkers, and my job were all being impacted. My boss summoned me back into her office the following day. She was strong yet courteous. We have to talk about yesterday's events, Morgan. I said. She said, there will never be another disturbance like this. I know exactly what you mean. It won't happen again, I said. I meant it too. I reported Liam to the police that night for harassment. I had no desire to, but he gave me no other option now. My statement was taken seriously and with empathy by the officer I spoke with. Tell us right away if he tries to get in touch with you or if he returns to your place of employment. Oh, he said. I had a feeling it would be the last straw, but Liam had another plan. He emailed the entire staff a few days later. The email was full of falsehoods, but the subject line told the truth about Morgan. He claimed that I had stolen from the inheritance, neglected my sisterly duties, and even included arbitrary images of bank records to give the impression that I had embezzled money. I was summoned into my manager's office once more, this time to speak with HR. A printed copy of the email was slipped across the desk by her. We need to discuss this, Morgan, she added. As I read the email, I was trembling with rage. All of this is false. With a quivering voice, I spoke. He is only attempting to destroy my life because I refused to pay him money. HR told me they thought I was telling the truth, but it was obvious that things had gotten out of hand. I followed up on my harassment claim and submitted the email to the police. They formally warned Liam that he would face charges if he continued to communicate with me or my place of employment. Liam must have been rattled by that warning because he became silent for the first time in months. No more phoning, emailing, or unexpectedly turning up. I was able to breathe again at last. However, the harm had already been done. Even though my coworkers were encouraging, I could sense that some individuals were still cautious since my reputation at work had suffered. When HR gave me the opportunity to switch to a new branch, I jumped at the chance. I went to a more peaceful area, where I could concentrate on rebuilding after packing up my desk and bidding my staff farewell. He continued after that. I received a call from my bank last week. The person stated that we must confirm a recent request for an account update. I felt sick to my stomach. When I asked for specifics, I hadn't asked for anything. They informed me that an attempt had been made to modify my security questions and contact details. The agent said the individual had claimed to be me, but the request had originated from a phone number I didn't recognize. My thoughts immediately turned to Liam. He had to be the one. Nobody else would even consider pulling such a stunt. The bank highlighted my account for fraud after I reported the occurrence right away. I'm the one who left stronger, even if Liam may have believed that his antics could control me. In addition to losing my assistance, he has also lost any remaining respect I may have for him. I'll provide another update if things slow here. However, given Liam, This may be the quiet before the storm. Let's see. The last update. Hello, everyone. Since everything happened with my brother Leon, I wanted to give you all an update on how things have been going. I've been trying to move on and start over after the entire inheritance situation, the harassment, and ultimately having to call the police on him. If you've been following my story, you know it's been a mess. There hasn't been any noise. That's precisely what I required. Liam hasn't been in my life for a few months, most likely because the police made it very evident that he would get into major trouble if he did another stunt. To be honest, I never imagined things would go to this point. Even though we would never be close, I had always thought that we might at least be polite. However, I've come to the realization that clinging to that optimism was only preparing me for disappointment in light of all he did. Since Liam's recent activities put him in a difficult situation, I've heard tidbits of his progress. Things seem to have caught up to him after he burned through the fortune in record time and alienated everyone around him. He was sued by one of the persons he borrowed money from, a so-called buddy. By accepting a long-term repayment plan, he narrowly avoided the court-ordered consequences, but he is having difficulty keeping up. In addition, he still owes money on Anthony's auto loan. I've heard that he has also been lagging behind on those payments and is always struggling to make ends meet. Liam is currently living in a small apartment and barely making ends meet, according to a mutual acquaintance, someone I didn't even know was still in contact with him. It seems that he has even begged for assistance from members of his extended family. I'm shocked that nobody is biting. It turns out that people aren't very sympathetic when you act rudely and entitled. Life has been quiet for me, and I mean that in the nicest possible manner. It was a wise decision to transfer to a smaller branch office. This is a close-knit squad. The people here are wonderful, and the job is rewarding. Above all, it is a great comfort that they are unaware of Liam or the mayhem he wrought. I don't have to worry with drama leaking into my work life. I can just show up and do my job. Anthony is on my mind a lot. I don't think the pain of losing him will ever completely go away. However, I'm confident that Dad would be pleased with me for not letting Liam bring me down and for sticking to my principles. Anthony has always emphasized the importance of honesty and maintaining my peace, and I have done just that. The most important realization I've had from all of this: Liam isn't missed at all. The finest choice I've ever made was to cut him out of my life. Letting rid of harmful relationships, particularly those involving family, may bring a sense of liberation. I felt that I had to keep trying for the sake of my family for a very long time. However, I feel as though a burden has been removed. When a buddy recently asked if I would ever think about getting back together with him, I said without hesitation that I would not. There were several opportunities for Liam to show me respect, but he blew them all. I refuse to place myself in a situation where I may be harmed by him once more. Liam was still attempting to find me when I last heard from him. He even tried to find out where I had gone, following the move by calling one of my former co-workers. Fortunately, he received nothing from my former workplace, and they promptly informed me of the situation. Since then, I've been extra cautious. Updated privacy settings, a new phone number, everything. I may have felt terrible for Liam in the past, but not now. He is currently dealing with the repercussions of the decisions he made. There is nothing I owe him, and I'm over feeling bad about putting my own mental health first. When the day is over. Life is too brief to let the turmoil of another person to rule yours. I'm not allowing anyone, even Liam, take away the calm I've finally discovered. I appreciate your patience during this crazy journey. This update has undoubtedly provided me closure, so I hope it does the same.